The mother is sharpening a knife to slaughter her last goat tomorrow. Not for the meat, for the money to pay a monk to pray over her dying daughter, because she knows of no other way to heal a child in this world. And her son has just remembered that in a past life he was an intensive care physician. The darkness smells of smoke and urine. Then the pain comes, not the kind that you feel from a blow, deeper, as if every bone in the body had been taken out and put back in the wrong order. Finn opens his eyes and doesn't recognize anything. A low ceiling made of blackened planks, walls covered in soot, a dim fire in the hearth. The air is so thick you could chew it, and the sound, a wet, gurgling wheeze from the corner. His body jerks before he has time to think. His arms are thin, his fingers are someone else's. His ribs stick out under his shirt so much you can count each one. He struggles to stand and falls. His knees buckle like those of a newborn foal. His head explodes with someone else's memories. His name is Finn. He's 13. His father died last winter. His mother's name is Isla. His sister is Macy. She's 6. She's lying in the corner on straw, wheezing. And just a second ago, he was someone else, an adult, a doctor. He remembers the smell of antiseptic, the lights in the operating room, the steering wheel, the crash, then nothing, then this ceiling. Finn crawls toward the girl on all fours. His muscles feel like a wet rope, but his hands rest on the child's forehead of their own accord, and he understands everything at once. Her skin is dry and hot, like a heated stone, pink spots on her stomach, a cracked tongue. Her breathing is rapid and shallow. Typhus. The 9th or 10th day. A fever over 40. Without help, she'll die by morning, maybe sooner. He presses his palm against her neck. Her pulse is weak and rapid, 3rd-degree dehydration. He knows this as surely as he knows his own name. Both names, the one that belongs to this body, and the other one that remained in another world along with the wrecked car on the bridge. The door creaks. A woman stands in the doorway, thin, dark circles under her eyes, a knife in her hand. Not a kitchen knife, the kind used to slaughter livestock. Ayla, mother. She looks at him, and he reads everything in her eyes. Tomorrow she'll slaughter the last goat to give the money to the monk, so that he'll pray over Macy. She doesn't know any other ways to treat her. Finn stands up. His legs are shaking, but he stands up. He tells his mother to put all the water in the house on the stove, every pot, every kettle. Ayla looks at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. He asks her to trust him just this once, just once. If their daughter isn't better by morning, she can do whatever she wants. But right now, he needs boiling water, a lot of it. Ayla doesn't move. She grips the knife. Then she looks at her wheezing daughter, who already reeks of death. She puts the knife on the shelf. She grabs a pot. She goes outside. Finn doesn't wait. He runs out into the yard barefoot. The cold stings his feet so badly it takes his breath away. Winter. Snow up to his ankles. A willow tree grows behind the hut. He recognizes it even in the dark by the silhouette of its branches. Willow bark, salicin, natural aspirin. He strips the bark with his slender hands. His fingers go numb. His nails break. He returns and tosses the bark into boiling water. While it's simmering, he finds a rag, relatively clean. He wrings it out into a pot of cooled water. He adds salt by eye, from memory, from another life. 1 teaspoon per liter, saline solution for the poor. He lifts Macy's head and pours the salt water in drop by drop. A spoonful, a pause, another spoonful. He can't go too fast. Her stomach won't handle it. Too slow won't work either. There's no time. In an hour, the broth will cool. He strains it through the rag and gives her a sip between sips of water. Fever reduction and rehydration. The 2 pillars of typhoid treatment when there are no antibiotics, no IVs. Nothing but bark and clean water. The night drags on. Finn doesn't sleep. Water every 10 minutes. Wiping her down with a vinegar-soaked cloth every half hour. They found the vinegar in a corner of his mother's room, an almost empty bottle. It was enough. By the middle of the night, Macy is delirious. She calls for her father. She calls for her mother. Once, she says his name. He grits his teeth and pours water into her mouth, spoonful by spoonful. Isla sits against the wall, motionless. Only her hands clench on her knees. She isn't praying. Finn notices this, so she no longer believes. Toward morning, the fever breaks, by 1/2 degree, then a little more. Her pulse is steadier. Her breathing is deeper. The pink spots aren't any brighter. He leans back against the wall. The body of a 13-year-old boy who hasn't slept all night aches as if he'd been beaten. He looks at his hands, small, dirty, calluses on his fingers, from the bowstring. This boy used to shoot a bow. Somewhere, in someone else's memory, the image of a taut bowstring pressed against a cheek surfaces, the weight of the arrow, the smell of the forest. He was a pediatrician and an intensive care physician. He worked 36-hour shifts. He lost patience. He drank coffee from paper cups. And now he's sitting on the dirt floor, holding the hand of a 6-year-old girl who isn't his. A girl dying of typhus. Not a stranger, his sister. By evening on the second day, Macy opens her eyes. She looks at him with a cloudy but meaningful gaze. She asks for bread. Ayla presses her hands to her mouth. She doesn't make a sound. Only tears stream down her cheeks, and she doesn't wipe them away. Finn wipes the sweat from his sister's forehead and tells his mother to make broth. Chicken broth, fat-free, with salt. And tomorrow, she's to shake all the straw out of the mattresses and burn it. He'll explain why later. Ayla nods. She goes to get the chicken. At the threshold, she turns around. She looks at her son for a long time. She walks out in silence. For 3 days, Finn doesn't leave Macy's side. He gives her herbal tea, feeds her broth, monitors her temperature. On the second day, the girl acts up. A good sign. Children who act up recover. Those who lie quietly die. On the third day, she demands to get up. He allows her only to sit up for 5 minutes. She sits down, looks at him with her huge gray eyes, and asks why he's acting so strange. He says he didn't get enough sleep. Macy says he never used to talk like that. Before, he was silent, and he didn't look at her like that, as if he's afraid she'll break. Finn says nothing. She's right. At night, he goes out into the yard. The snow is light and prickly. The village lies all around, 40 yards. Low huts with thatched roofs, skinny chickens, a dirty road. Beyond the village lies the forest, dark, dense, Lord's Forest, the property of Lord Kerwin Hawthorne. A peasant caught there with stolen goods hangs from the nearest tree. Finn looks at this cruel, dirty, hungry world and thinks, Macy will survive, but winter is long. There's no food, there's no money. The goat is alive but gives little milk. In a week, they'll start starving. And in the village, there are 30 more households where children are coughing and burning up with fever. And no one knows that all they need to do is boil water and wash their hands. He looks at his hands once more. Calluses from the bowstring, the memory of another's body. The forest is full of game for which people are hanged. And his head is full of knowledge that is worth more than gold here. He returns to the house. He finds a bow in the corner, a short hunting bow made of hazel, simple but effective. A bowstring made of sinew, 3 arrows with iron tips, rough work, but it'll do for a hare. He draws the bowstring. His body remembers on its own. His shoulders settle into the correct position. His fingers wrap around the bow in a familiar grip. And on top of that foreign muscle memory, something else settles in. Biomechanics, the angle of the elbow, the anchor point at the cheekbone, breath control, a smooth release without a jerk. He knows how to shoot, not like the hunters in the village, but the way athletes are taught. He lowers the bow. Tomorrow he'll go into the forest. He'll bring back meat. He'll feed his family. And then he'll start thinking ahead. Because there was one thing he understood for certain on that first night beside his wheezing sister. He isn't going to just survive in this world. He's going to change it, one small step at a time, one rescued child at a time. On the morning of the 4th day, he gets up before dawn. Macy sleeps soundly. Isla sleeps curled up by the hearth. Finn gets dressed. He takes his bow. 3 arrows. He steps out into the darkness. The snow crunches under his feet. The forest begins beyond the field, 300 steps away, a black wall of trees. He walks and thinks that in a past life he used to go hunting with his father in the forests of Maine. A different forest, different snow, but the feeling is the same. Silence, cold, anticipation. He enters the forest. He moves quietly. Finn's body knows these trails. It knows where the hare burrows are, where the deer come to drink. Half an hour later, he spots a hare, a gray blob on the white snow. 30 paces. He raises his bow, draws the string, exhales, releases. The arrow flies, and for a moment the world stands still. Then the sound of the impact. The hare falls on its side and doesn't move. The arrow struck it squarely in the head. Finn stands over the dead hare, his heart pounding. Not from excitement, from understanding. It works. The bow remembers the target's body. His mind remembers the physics. Together, they produce a result that neither can achieve alone. He picks up the hare. He pulls out the arrow. He moves on. An hour later, he has 2 hares, both killed with a single shot. He returns before dawn. He places the hares on the table. Isla wakes up at the sound. She sees the meat. She looks at her son. Her eyes fill with tears, but she doesn't cry. She just says she'll cut it up and make some soup for Macy. Finn sits down against the wall. The body of a 13-year-old boy isn't used to nighttime forays. His muscles tremble. His fingers are scraped raw. But there's meat on the table. For the first time this winter, Macy wakes up around noon. She in the air and smiles, widely, the way only children who are recovering can. The smell of meat soup fills the cabin and drives out the smell of illness. Finn watches his sister eat, slowly, spoonful by spoonful, just as he taught her. And he thinks this is only the beginning. Beyond the cabin's walls lies a village of 40 households, where every week someone dies from illnesses he knows how to treat. Beyond the village is a forest full of food, the kind of food that gets you hanged. Beyond the forest is a world where the church burns those who heal without prayer. And he has the body of a child, the mind of a grown doctor, and 3 arrows with rough tips. Not much to go on. But Macy is eating her soup and smiling. And that's enough for now. A week after saving Macy, Finn knew everything he could about the Valley of the Willows without drawing attention to himself. 40 households, 183 people, if you count the 2 old men who no longer got out of bed. A well in the square. A second well by the old oak on the edge of the village. The river beyond the forest, frozen solid to the bottom. A church chapel without a priest. The priest had died last year from the same creeping fever, and no new one had been sent. The village headman, Bren, a fat man with a red nose who drank more than he governed, but paid his taxes to the Lord on time, and that was enough to keep the village out of trouble. Midwife Mara, over 60 years old, skinny as a rake. She had delivered the babies of every other woman in the village. She had buried every 3rd woman who gave birth. She healed with prayers and the laying on of hands. She considered herself the voice of the bright mother on earth and brooked no objections. Ben the blacksmith, old, huge, hands like shovels. The only person in the village whose work was worth anything outside the valley. He forged horseshoes, sickles, and nails. His 14-year-old daughter, Sadie, carried coal for him and stoked the bellows. Finn remembered her from the very first day. Redhead, freckles, eyes quick and fierce. She looked at the world as if it owed her something, and she was going to collect. But all that came later. First, there was Tom, the neighbor's 9-year-old boy, the son of Walt, the carpenter. Finn saw him by chance. He was walking past the yard and heard a child whimpering. Not crying, whimpering, like a puppy that had been kicked. Tom was sitting on the porch step, holding his right leg. The leg of his pants was wet. Finn walked over. He asked what had happened. Tom said nothing. Finn crouched down and looked at the leg. The wound was below the knee. It was a gash. It was dirty. The edges were red and swollen. There was pus. The smell was sweetish and heavy. The wound was about 5 days old, maybe older. No one had treated it. No one had stitched it up. They'd just wrapped it in a rag and left it. Finn touched the skin around the wound. It was hot. Red streaks were spreading up his shin, lymphangitis. The infection was spreading through the lymphatic vessels. 2 more days and sepsis would set in. 3 more and the boy would die. Finn asked where his mother was. Tom said she was doing laundry by the well. Finn went to the well. He found a woman named Gwen. She was short. She was all bundled up. Her eyes were hollow with exhaustion. Finn told her that the wound on her son's leg was festering, and that if nothing was done, the boy would lose his leg, or his life. Gwen looked at him as if he were crazy. He was 13 years old, a peasant boy. What could he possibly know about wounds? Finn said he was the one who had saved Macy from creeping fever. Gwen knew that. The whole village knew. She was silent for a moment. Then she said he could take a look. Finn went back to Tom. He brought boiled water from the house, clean rags, honey, a knife, a thin bone needle his mother used for sewing, horsehair he'd begged from Ben the blacksmith in exchange for a promise to count his nails. He washed the wound with boiled water. Tom screamed. Finn held him by the ankle and didn't stop. He squeezed out the pus. He rinsed it again. He applied honey, a thick layer. Honey was a natural antiseptic. Not penicillin, but better than a dirty rag. Then he stitched up the wound. 5 stitches. Horsehair. Rough. But the edges came together. He bandaged it with a clean cloth. He told Gwen to change the bandage every day, to rinse it only with boiled water. Only boiled water. And not to let the boy scratch it. 3 days later, he came by to check on him. The redness was subsiding. The pus was gone. The stitches were holding. Tom was sitting on the same porch step, nibbling on a piece of dry bread. He saw Finn and waved. A week later, the boy was walking. 2 weeks later, he was running. Gwen came to Finn with a pot of porridge. She set it on the threshold. She didn't say a word. She left. That was the first gift. Others followed. The old man from the house at the far end sent his grandson with a bundle of firewood. The woman from whom Finn had just chased the dog away a week earlier brought eggs. The village was starting to look at him differently, but not everyone. Finn knew that sooner or later this would happen, and it happened on the 9th day after Tom's rescue. He was walking across the square when Mara blocked his path. The midwife stood in the middle of the village with a stick in and looked up at him. She was small and thin, but there was enough venom in her eyes to last 10 people. She said he was playing with forces he didn't understand, that healing was granted only to those blessed by the Bright Mother, that a boy who boiled bark and smeared honey on wounds was acting like a witch, and that she'd seen what happens to witch doctors. Finn stood there and listened. People were gathering around. He saw their faces, fear, curiosity, and in some eyes, agreement with Mara. He could have said many things. He could have asked how many women in labor she had buried. He could have said that the Bright Mother doesn't wash her hands before a birth. He didn't say any of that. He said that Mara was a wise woman and that he respected her experience. He said he wasn't going to treat anyone against their will. Whoever wants to can come to him. Whoever doesn't want to can go to Mara. He is not her enemy. He just knows something that might help. Mara spat on the ground and walked away, but the words had been spoken in front of everyone, and Finn knew it wouldn't end there. That same evening, his mother came to see him. Isla sat down across from him and was silent for a long time. Then she said she needed to know. She said that Finn was her son and that she loved him, but that boy, the one who, a month ago, couldn't even look an adult in the eye, the one who was afraid of the village bully, the one who didn't know a single healing potion, that boy and this one, they were different people. Finn looked at her, at this thin, haggard woman who had sharpened a knife for a goat to pay for the monk's prayer, who hadn't slept beside her daughter while he poured water drop by drop. He could have lied, could have said he'd had a dream, that the Bright Mother had sent a vision. Any lie would have worked. He told the truth. Not the whole truth, but the truth. He said that when Macy got really sick, something happened to him. That it was as if he'd woken up and knew things he hadn't known before. How to heal, how to shoot better, how to do what needed to be done. He said he couldn't explain where it came from, but that he was still him, Finn, her son, and that everything he does it for them, for her, for Macy. Isla was silent for a long time. She looked into his eyes. Then she said quietly that she didn't know who he was now, but if he was Finn, then she was with him, and if he wasn't Finn, she was with him anyway, because he had brought Macy back to her. Finn nodded. His throat tightened. A 34-year-old doctor in the body of a 13-year-old boy, and a woman who accepted him without explanation, simply because he had saved her daughter. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark and listened to Macy's breathing, steady, calm, no wheezing. And he thought about the well by the old oak. He'd checked it 2 days ago. The water was murky. It smelled strange. 50 paces up the slope from the well was an old cesspool that no one had cleaned in years. Groundwater was carrying sewage straight into the well. Half of the typhoid cases in the village started in the yards that drew water from there. He knew that. He knew it for sure. But telling the village about it after the altercation with Mara was dangerous. Finn lay there and thought. Then he got up. He found a piece of charcoal in the corner, and until morning, he drew on the back of an old plank a diagram of the well, the location of the cesspool, the direction of the groundwater flow, arrows and lines. In the morning, he went to see the village elder, Bren. Bren was sitting in his house, the largest in the village, 2 stories, sort of. He was drinking something from a clay mug. He looked at Finn with cloudy eyes. He asked what he wanted. Finn placed the board on the table. He showed him the diagram. He said that the well by the old oak was poisoned, that there was a cesspit nearby, and sewage was flowing into the water, and that half the sick people in the village drank from that well. Bren looked at the diagram. He looked at Finn. He said that a boy shouldn't be telling the village head what to do. Finn said he wasn't telling him. He was asking to close the well, to direct people to the main well in the square. Bran said the well by the old oak had been there for 30 years and hadn't bothered anyone. Finn said that the people who had been drinking from it for 30 years got sick more often than those who didn't. Bran could check for himself, ask at any farmstead, who gets their water where and who's been sick and when. Bran grimaced. He said he'd think about it. Finn left. He knew Bran wouldn't close anything. He's afraid. He's afraid of change. He's afraid the Lord will find out that someone other than him is in charge in the village. So another approach is needed. Finn didn't go home. He went to the blacksmith's. Old Ben was standing at the anvil. The hammer blows rang out in the cold air. Sadie was sitting by the bellows. She saw Finn and narrowed her eyes. Finn waited until the blacksmith was finished. Then he said he needed help. He needed an iron grate for the well by the old oak, one that would prevent anyone from drawing water. Ben asked why. Finn explained, simply, briefly. The water is bad. People are getting sick. Ben listened. Then he said he'd make the grate for 2 rabbits. Finn said he'd bring them tomorrow. Ben nodded. He went back to the anvil. Sadie watched Finn walk to the door. 2 days later, the grate was ready. Finn and Ben came to the well at night. They put the grate in place. They wedged it in place with stones. In the morning, the village saw it. Bren came over, red with rage. He asked who had dared to do it. Finn stood beside him and said it was him, and that if Bren wanted to, he could take it down, but he should listen first. Finn spoke in front of everyone, quietly, calmly. He said that the water in this well carried disease, that there was a cesspit nearby, that tiny particles of dirt, invisible to the naked eye, seeped into the water through the ground. The epidemic struck the Valley of the Willows in the 3rd week after Finn's awakening. Not right away. It crept up like a beast. First, an old man on the far edge of the village fell ill, then his grandson, then a neighbor, then her 3 children. In 4 days, the creeping fever had struck down 12 people. By the end of the week, the number had risen to 20. The village froze. Doors were shut. The smoke from the chimneys was thin because they were conserving firewood. The streets were empty. Only coughs came from the windows. And the smell. That very smell of illness that Finn had recognized on his first night with Macy. Swedish, heavy. The smell of a body burning from the inside. Finn acted quickly. He knew there was no time to waste. Typhus waits for no one. On the outskirts of the village stood an empty cabin. Old man Emmett had lived there alone and died last fall. No one had taken the house. They believed it was haunted. Finn cleared it out in 2 hours. He threw out all the straw. He washed the walls with boiling water. He covered the floor with fresh sand from the Rizal. He hung wet rags by the entrance. He made everyone who came in wash their hands in a basin of hot water. He called it a clean house. Then he walked through the village, knocking on doors. He explained, "If anyone is sick, bring them to me. Don't keep them at home. A sick person near healthy people infects everyone. I'll treat them in the clean house. It's clean here. There's boiled water here. There's willow bark decoction here." Gwen was the first to bring her children, 2 of them, a boy and a girl. Both were burning up with fever. Finn laid them down. He began giving them fluids. The same routine as with Macy. A spoonful of saline solution, the willow bark decoction, wiping them down. More people came after Gwen. By evening, 9 people were lying in the clean house, 6 children and 3 adults. There wasn't enough room. Finn cleared all the furniture out of the house except for the cots. He laid the people on the floor on clean cloth. He set up wooden partitions between them, planks that the carpenter's son had hauled over. Not walls, but at least something to separate the sick. He didn't sleep. He walked from one to the next, checked their pulses, gave them water, changed the cloths on their foreheads. He monitored their breathing. He counted in his head. This one is on the 7th day, this one on the 5th. This girl is on the 3rd. She's doing better. This man is worse. Rails in his right lung, a complication, pneumonia. A different approach is needed. Honey by mouth, more fluids. Raise his head to make breathing easier. By morning, he was on his feet, only because he couldn't bring himself to lie down. Ayla arrived at dawn, silently, with a pot of broth. She looked at the hut full of sick people, at her son with dark circles under his eyes. She set down the pot, took a rag, began wiping down the nearest child. Finn wanted to say thank you. He didn't. He just nodded and went to the next patient. On the 2nd day, the first one died. The old man at the far end, the very one from whom the outbreak began. He'd made it to the safe house too late, too emaciated, too old. Finn stood over him and watched as he stopped breathing. He'd seen death before, in his past life. In the ICU, children they couldn't save, old people who slipped away quietly in the early morning. But here, in this hut reeking of smoke and disease, without medical equipment, without medicine, with willow bark and boiled water, it was different, harder, closer. He covered the old man with a cloth, carried the body out, returned to the living. On the 3rd day, Sadie fell ill. The blacksmith's daughter came into the clean house on her own. She stood in the doorway, swaying. Her face was red. Her eyes were cloudy. She said her head was splitting and her whole body ached. Then she added that if Finn told anyone she'd come, she'd kill him. Finn placed his hand on her forehead. She was burning up. He laid her down. He began to treat her. Sadie was strong, healthier than most of the children in the village because the blacksmith fed his family better than the others. But typhus doesn't discriminate. Finn gave her fluids the same way he had with Macy, 1 spoonful at a time, every 10 minutes. He wiped her down, gave her bark, and talked to her. Not because she asked him to, but because he knew that sick people who can hear a voice find it easier to fight. He told her about herbs, which ones were for fever, which ones for pain, which ones stop bleeding. Sadie listened even in her delirium, and when the fever subsided for an hour or 2, she'd open her eyes and say he had to repeat himself because she hadn't remembered everything. On the 4th day of the epidemic, Finn realized he couldn't handle it alone. 30 patients, just him. Isla was helping, but she didn't know what to do without his instructions. He needed extra hands and extra brains, people who could do what he showed them without constant supervision. He looked at Sadie. She was on the mend, faster than he'd expected. A strong constitution, good food as a child, and a stubbornness that was almost enviable. By the 5th day, she was already sitting up and demanding to do something. Finn told her to help. He showed her how to wash her hands properly before approaching a patient. He showed her how to administer saline solution, how to wipe them down, how to check a pulse on the wrist. Sadie listened. She nodded. She remembered everything the first time. He'd say the name of a herb once, and she'd repeat it flawlessly an hour later. He'd demonstrate how to apply a bandage, and she'd tay the movement exactly. Finn watched her and thought that in another world, this girl would have become a doctor, or a scientist, or anything she wanted. But here, a blacksmith shop or marriage awaited her. On the 6th day, the old woman died. On the 7th, a 4-year-old boy. Finn didn't make it in time. They brought the boy in too late. His mother had hidden him at home for 3 days and tried to heal him with prayer. By the time she brought him in, the child wouldn't open his eyes anymore. Finn did everything he could. He gave him water, he wiped him down, all night long. The boy died just before dawn, quietly, as if he'd simply ceased to exist. Finn stepped out of the clean house. He stood in the yard, his hands in warm water in a basin. He washed them, for a long time, longer than necessary. Sadie came out after him. She stood beside him. She was silent. Then she said she wouldn't have made it in time either. Finn said he knew. He said it wasn't their fault. The problem was that the mother had come too late, because she was afraid, because Mara had said that a clean house was a witch's lair, and the mother believed the midwife instead of him, and her child died. Sadie said it wasn't his fault. Finn said it wasn't his. But it wasn't that mother's fault either. It was the fault of a world where knowledge is considered a sin. Then he fell silent, because 13-year-old boys don't talk like that. And Sadie looked at him with that same look, like his mother, as if she saw someone else behind his eyes. The epidemic lasted 3 weeks. Finn lost another one. A 30-year-old woman with a heart condition. That made 3. 3 out of 30. During the last outbreak in the neighboring village, 25 out of 40 who fell ill had died. Finn knew that figure. He'd heard it from people who came for water. 25 out of 40. And he had 3 out of 30, and all 3 had come to him too late. When the fever had receded, the village stood silent and bewildered. People came out of their houses. They squinted at the pale winter sun. They looked at the clean house, at Finn, who was standing at the entrance washing rags in a basin. Mara hadn't left her house in 2 weeks. No one went to see her. Then she came out. She walked past Finn without looking at him, but there was no longer venom in her eyes, only fear. She was afraid of him now. Bren came to see Finn the next day. Winter was slowly letting go of the Valley of the Willows. Snow still lay in the shade of the trees, but in open areas the ground was already turning black. Streams were beginning to murmur beneath their icy crusts. The birds were returning. And along with the first signs of spring, the scent of change came to the village. Not literally. It was just that people had started to walk differently. Their backs were a little straighter, their voices a little louder. For the first time in years, the Willow Valley had made it through the winter without a child's funeral. Not a single child had been lost since Finn had established the House of Purity, and the village could feel it. Finn felt something else. He felt that his body was changing. Not quickly, but noticeably. Regular meals were doing their job. 2 months of meat from hunting. Broth, porridge. He was still thin, but his ribs had stopped sticking out. His arms had grown stronger. He could draw the bowstring 20 times in a row without his fingers trembling. A month ago, he could manage 10. Every morning, he would head into the forest before dawn. He hunted. 1 outing, 1 or 2 kills. Hares, sometimes partridges. Once, a fox. Isla traded the fur for salt in a distant village. Finn never took more than he needed. He never took the same trail twice in a row. He varied his routes. He covered his tracks. He knew that Lord Hawthorne hanged poachers, and he knew that sooner or later someone would notice. But his family needed meat, and the village needed meat. He gave away half of his catch to those who had sick children, to those who couldn't work. Isla grumbled quietly that her son was giving away food while he himself went hungry. Finn replied that he wasn't hungry, he was lying, but not by much. Hunting had become a habit. The bow had become an extension of his arm. He shot now without thinking. Raise, draw, exhale, release, all in one motion. Someone else's muscle memory and his knowledge of biomechanics had fused into a single whole. He'd hit a hare in the head from 40 paces, a partridge in flight from 25 paces. Old Kenneth saw it once. Kenneth was the best hunter in the village. Gray-haired, lean, one-eyed. He'd lost his left eye 20 years ago to a bear's paw. He'd taught young Finn how to shoot 3 years ago, taught him how to hold a bow, taught him how to choose an arrow, taught him patience. Now he stood behind a tree and watched as his former student took down a running hare with a single shot, without hesitation, without missing. Kenneth stepped out from behind the tree. Finn didn't flinch. He'd heard him from 20 paces away. The snow gave him away. Kenneth was silent for a long time. Then he said, "That's not how you shoot." Finn asked, "How you don't shoot that way?" Kenneth said, "That's exactly how you do it. That he's been shooting for 40 years and can't hit a running hare on the first try from that distance. But a 13-year-old boy can." Finn said he'd been lucky. Kenneth shook his head. He said that once was luck. Every day is something else. Then he said that if Finn kept going into the woods every morning, sooner or later they'd catch him. The gamekeeper, Haldor, isn't a fool. He sees the tracks. Finn said he knew. Kenneth was silent for a moment. Then he said he'd go with him. Not to shoot, to watch, to cover him, because a boy who feeds half the village and heals the sick shouldn't end up hanging from a tree because of a hare. Finn wanted to refuse. He didn't. He knew the value of allies. The two of them went into the forest together for the next few weeks. Kenneth taught him things that no borrowed memory knew. How to read the forest, how to hear the wind, how to tell a morning track from an evening one, how to tell from droppings how many hours ago a deer had passed through here. Finn soaked it all in. In return, he told Kenneth what he himself knew, that you should shoot as you exhale, not as you inhale. That the anchor point should be at the cheekbone, not the ear. That if the wind is blowing from the left, you should aim slightly to the left, because the arrow will veer to the right. Kenneth listened. He tried. He said nothing. A week later, his shots were 20 paces more accurate. He didn't say thank you. He simply left a new quiver on the threshold of Finn's house one morning, sewn from deerskin, with 6 arrows. The arrowheads were sharp and smooth, the work of Ben the blacksmith. Finn understood. Kenneth had ordered them himself. He'd paid for them. It was more than a gift. It was an acknowledgement. Spring was in full swing, and with it came Haldor, Lord Hawthorne's gamekeeper. Finn knew he would come. He'd been waiting. He just didn't know when. It happened in the middle of the day. Finn was returning from the forest, empty-handed. He'd deliberately not shot anything this time. He'd gone to check out some new trails. 2 men were waiting for him at the edge of the woods, Haldor and his assistant. Haldor was big, not fat, broad, shoulders like barn doors, a beard down to his chest, small, watchful eyes, a sword at his belt, a crossbow on his back. He looked down at Finn and said he'd long wanted to meet the boy who shoots hares in the eye. Finn stood there. His heart was pounding. His body wanted to run. He didn't let it. He said he didn't understand what they were talking about. Haldor smirked. He said there were fewer hares in the forest now, that the tracks led to the village, that arrows with rough tips were stuck in the trees, and that he wasn't a fool. Finn said nothing. Haldor said that according to Lord Hawthorne's law, a poacher is hanged from the nearest tree. He looked at the oak tree overhead. Then he looked at Finn, and he said he had another proposal. Finn waited. Haldor said he had a son, 2 years old, born weak, not growing. He doesn't eat much. His wife says it's the evil eye. A monk told him to pray. He's been praying for half a year. It's not helping. But he'd heard that a young man in the village was a healer, that he'd cured 30 people of creeping fever, that he hadn't lost a single child who'd come to him in time. Haldor looked at him. And in the eyes of the big man with a sword at his belt, Finn saw what he'd seen 1,000 times in his past life. A parent's fear for their child. The intense fear on Earth. Finn said he would take a look at the boy. Haldor nodded. They set off. Haldor's house stood a 3-hour walk from the village, on the edge of the Lord's forest. A gamekeeper's lodge, sturdy, with stone walls and a shingle roof. Inside, it was clean. Haldor's wife, short, quiet, with frightened eyes. The child was lying in a cradle. Finn approached. He looked. The boy was small for a 2-year-old, thin, pale. His belly was swollen. Finn placed his hand on the child's belly, gently. Enlarged liver, enlarged spleen. He looked at the gums, pale, almost white. He looked at the fingernails, concave, spoon-shaped, anemia, severe. He asked what the boy was being fed. Haldor's wife said porridge and milk. Finn asked if they gave him meat. The woman was surprised. She said he was still too young for meat. Finn said the boy needed iron, that his blood was weak, that porridge and milk don't provide what he needs. He needs liver, chicken, or rabbit, boiled and mashed every day. And greens, any kind, nettles, sorrel, whatever's available. And no goat's milk in large quantities. It prevents the iron from being absorbed. Haldor listened. His wife listened. Both looked at him as if he were speaking the language of angels. Finn said it wasn't the evil eye or a curse. It was hunger. The boy simply wasn't getting what his body needed. He said that after a month of proper food, the child would start to grow. In 2 months, he'd be rosy-cheeked and cheerful. If not, then he'd come back and take another look. Haldor was silent the whole way back. He walked beside Finn, not ahead of him, but right beside him. At the edge of the forest, he stopped. He looked at him. He said that if the boy got better, he'd be in his debt. Finn said there was no need to owe him anything. Just don't hang people for hairs. Haldor didn't answer. But as Finn was walking away, the gamekeeper called after him that he wouldn't be searching the nearby forest anymore. Let the boy go hunting. The far forest was another matter. He went there on his own. Finn turned around. He nodded. It was a tacit agreement, not friendship, not an alliance, a truce. A month later, Haldor came to the village on his own. Finn saw him in the square. The big man was standing there, twirling his hat in his hands. A boy stood next to him, rosy-cheeked, standing on his own 2 feet. He was holding his father's finger and looking around. Haldor walked over to Finn. He said his son was eating, growing, laughing, that his wife cried every evening, but out of happiness. Then he paused and said that Finn could count on him. He didn't specify in what way, just that he could. That was the turning point. Finn understood him immediately. The Lord's gamekeeper was on his side, a man with a sword and a crossbow, a man who knows every trail in the forest, who knows the patrol schedules, who knows when the Lord sends out tax collectors and when the road is clear. The first grown man with a weapon to stand beside a 13-year-old boy, not because he believed in miracles, but because his son was alive. That evening, Finn sat in the clean house. Sadie was beside him. She was sorting through herbs and dividing them into little bags. Yarrow on the left, mint on the right, willow bark in a separate bag. She did this silently and intently. Her fingers were quick, precise. Finn watched her and thought. He needed students. Not just one, many. Sadie was the first. He needed more. He told her he wanted to recruit more people, those who were ready to learn. Sadie asked what they would learn. Finn said everything. Herbs, treating wounds, how to deliver a baby, how to stop bleeding, how to stitch wounds, how to prepare decoctions. Sadie said the girls would come. Guys probably wouldn't. Finn asked why. Sadie looked at him as if he were a fool and said that guys think healing is women's work, and men's work is plowing and fighting. Finn said he also needed people who could shoot, that he wanted to teach them how to shoot. Not for hunting, something else, the kind he knew. Sadie raised an eyebrow. She asked why. Finn said that someday they'd have to defend themselves, not from hares, Sadie was silent. Then she said they'd come for Finn, sooner or later, the church or the Lord, or both, and that he knew it. Finn said he knew. That's why he needed people who could shoot. Sadie nodded. She put the last little bag of herbs on the shelf. She said she'd find some guys, and some girls. The next day, 5 of them showed up at the clean house. 3 girls and 2 guys. The youngest was 12. The oldest was 16. Sadie brought them over just as she'd promised. Finn stood in front of them, thinking he probably looked ridiculous. A 13-year-old kid who was about to teach. But he opened his mouth and began to speak. Simply. About how you need to wash your hands. About why. About the tiny creatures you can't see with the naked eye but that live in dirt and water and on unwashed hands. That get into the body through the mouth and through wounds. That cause illness. The 5 of them listened. One of the boys, named Roddy, snorted and said it sounded like a fairy tale. Finn said, "Let him remember how many people died of creeping fever last year, and how many died this year." When Finn was treating them, Roddy fell silent. It was the first school, a kitchen table, 5 students, bundles of herbs, a 13-year-old teacher with the eyes of a 34-year-old. The beginning. Summer arrived quickly and eagerly. The grass grew waist-high. The trees rustled with leaves. The forest filled with life and rustling sounds. Finn felt his body finally responding to food and work. His muscles firmed up. His shoulders broadened. He still looked his 13, maybe 14. But this was now a body that could work. One that could shoot for an hour straight without a tremor. One that could walk 10 miles through the woods and return without staggering. The school was growing. 5 students became 7, then 10. They came from neighboring yards, from the far end of the village. Once, a boy came from the village over the hill. He walked for 3 hours. He said he'd heard about the boy who healed and that he wanted to learn. Finn took him in. Classes were held every day. In the morning, herbs and healing. In the evening, archery. Finn divided the students. The girls and those who wanted to learn healing. The boys and those who wanted to learn archery. But he didn't enforce the division strictly. Sadie shot better than half the boys, and he had no intention of stopping her. And Roddy, surprisingly, could remember the names of the herbs just as well as the girls. Finn took archery seriously. He made targets out of sheaves of straw. He stretched old hides over them. He drew circles on them with charcoal. Every evening, after working in the fields, the students would learn to the meadow behind the village to practice shooting. Finn stood nearby, correcting their grip, adjusting their elbow position, changing their stance, and explaining their breathing. 1 exhale, 1 shot. Don't rush. Don't flinch. Let go. It was impossible to shoot far with the bows the village boys had. They were short hunting bows, weak, good for a hare 20 paces away, no farther. Finn thought about this every night. In his mind lived the image of a different bow, a long one, as tall as a man, made of yew or ash, with powerful limbs, capable of sending an arrow 200 paces, with enough penetrating power to pierce chainmail. An English longbow, a weapon that, in his home world, had changed the history of warfare. One that didn't exist here. He knew the design. He knew the proportions. He knew what kind of wood was needed. But to make such a bow on his own, that was another matter entirely. He needed a blacksmith for the arrowheads, a carpenter to work the wood, and time, a lot of time to let the blanks dry. He spoke with Ben. The blacksmith listened in silence. Finn drew on the ground with a stick, a longbow, its shape, its dimensions, the arrowheads. He explained why. Ben asked, "Against whom?" Finn said he simply wanted his men to be able to shoot farther and more accurately. Ben looked at him for a long time. Then he said he'd make the arrowheads, but he added that woodworking wasn't his craft. Finn knew that. He found several suitable yew trunks in the forest. He cut them down, hauled them back, and began working on them himself in the evenings, after school and after hunting. He sat in the yard and planed the wood, slowly, carefully. The wood had to dry for months, but he started on the first blank right away. Kenneth saw what he was doing and came over to watch. Finn showed him. He explained the principle, a longbow. The limbs work in compression and tension at the same time. The inner part is made of sapwood. The outer part is made of heartwood. The different properties of the wood are used together. Kenneth listened. Then he took the blank in his hands. He turned it over in his hands. He held it up to himself. The bow was almost as tall as he was. He looked at Finn and said that this wasn't a weapon for hares. It was a weapon for war. Finn said he knew. Kenneth was silent for a moment. Then he said that in that case, he needed to hurry, because war would come sooner than he thought. Finn asked why. Kenneth explained. He had gone to a fair in a distant village. He'd overheard conversations. Lord Hawthorne was collecting new taxes, double the usual amount. The king demands money for the war in the south. Hawthorne is taking everything he can from the villages. Those who don't pay lose their land, or their freedom. 3 villages to the east have already handed over half their livestock to the Lord. People are starving, and they're angry. Finn listened. He thought. Double taxes meant that Ivy Valley would have to pay as well. That B Ran would come with a demand. That families would have to give up their very last possessions. That the children would go hungry again. Everything he had built could collapse in a single week of tax collection. But that was a problem for later. Right now, there was another one. She came quietly, on soft feet, in a gray habit and with a leather-bound book in her hand. Brother Cosma appeared in the Valley of the Willows in the middle of summer. Short, thin, a pleasant face, warm eyes. His smile was gentle. He had come on foot, alone, without an entourage. He knocked on the village elder's door and said he was a wandering brother of the Church of the Bright Mother, that he was traveling through the villages in the north, bringing the word and comfort, and that he had heard a miracle had occurred in the Valley of the Willows. A disease had come, and then receded. People had recovered, and that he would like to speak with the people and understand whether the Bright Mother's hand was in it. Bren was overjoyed. A priest, finally. The village had been without a priest for a year. The people were unbaptized. The dead had not been given their last rites. Let him stay as long as he wants. Brother Cosma settled into the chapel. He walked around the village. He talked to people, quietly, gently. He asked about their health, about their families, about the winter, and in passing, about the boy Finn. Finn found out about him on the very first day. Macy ran up and said there was a new man in the village, in gray clothes, handsome, and that he'd been asking about Finn. Finn felt a chill, not on the outside, on the inside. He knew what that meant, an inquisitor. Perhaps not in a formal capacity, but in essence. A man who had come to check whether heresy was spreading in the village, whether anyone was healing without prayer, whether anyone was infringing on the church's monopoly on communication with the divine. Finn gathered his students that very evening. He told them that classes were suspended, for the time being. Put the herbs away. Take down the targets. No lessons while that man was in the village. Sadie asked why. Finn explained. The church burns those who heal without prayer. If Brother Cosma sees the empty house and realizes what's going on here, he'll write a report. And in a month, people with fire will come here. Sadie turned pale. She nodded. The students went their separate ways. Finn closed up the clean house. He took down the sign. He cleared out everything inside that could give away his work. He hid the herbs in his mother's cellar. He gave the sewing tools to Sadie to take home. As if nothing had happened. As if the boy were just a boy. For 3 days, Finn avoided his brother Cosma. He wandered through the back alleys. He didn't show his face in the square. He stopped hunting. He stayed home. He waited. On the 4th day, Cosma came to him himself. He knocked on the door. Isla opened it. Finn was standing behind her. Brother Cosma smiled and said he'd like to talk to young Finn, whom the whole village speaks so highly of. Isla looked at her son. Finn nodded. They sat down at the table. Macy was playing in the corner. Cosma didn't shoo her away. On the contrary, he stroked her head. He asked her name. Macy told him. Cosma said it was a beautiful name. Then he turned to Finn and began asking questions. Quiet, precise, to the point. He asked how Finn had saved his sister from a fever. Finn said he'd given her water to drink and a decoction of bark. Cosma asked how he knew the bark helped. Finn said he'd heard it from a traveling merchant. Cosma jotted something down in his notebook. He asked about Tom. Finn said he had cleaned the wound and stitched it up. Cosma asked who had taught him to stitch wounds. Finn said he'd seen his mother sew clothes and tried doing the same. Cosma smiled. His eyes didn't smile. They watched. They studied. They analyzed. Finn felt that gaze like the touch of a cold blade against his skin. This man was clever. More dangerous than any lord with a sword. More dangerous than hunger and disease. Because a lord kills the body. But this man could destroy everything Finn had built with a single report, with a single word whispered into the right ear. Cosma asked a few more questions about the clean house. Finn said it was just a hut where he cared for the sick. Cosma asked why he washed his hands with boiling water. Finn said it just seemed like the right thing to do. Intuition. Cosma took note. He smiled. He said Finn was an amazing boy, that the bright mother had clearly blessed him. He thanked him for the conversation. He stood. He patted Macy on the head one more time. He walked out. Finn was sitting at the table, not moving. Isla was standing by the wall, her hands pressed to her chest. She understood everything, without a word. Macy walked over to Finn and asked why that man was smiling so strangely. Finn said that some people smile with their mouths, but not with their eyes. Macy thought for a moment and said that it was probably because eyes are heavier than mouths and harder to lift. Finn smiled for the first time in a week. Cosma stayed in the village for 4 more days. He talked to people. He took notes. Then he left as quietly as he had come. Finn watched him go from the roof of the cabin. He watched as the gray figure disappeared on the road beyond the hill, and he knew he would return, not alone. That evening, Haldor came to see him. The gamekeeper stood in the doorway, twirling his cap in his hands. He said he'd seen a monk on the road, that the monk had stopped at the Hawthorne estate. He'd spoken with the steward. He'd been taking notes, and that Finn had better know about this. Finn thanked him. Haldor left. Finn stood in the yard. The sun was setting. Summer smelled of grass and flowers. Macy was laughing inside the house. Isla was clinking dishes. Sadie was walking along the path toward his house with a small bag of dried herbs in her hand. Kenneth was smoking his pipe by his fence and raised his hand in greeting. All of this, everything he had built over these past months, fragile as an eggshell. A single monk with a little book could crush it with a single finger. Finn went inside. He sat down at the table. He took out the board on which he drew with charcoal, and he began to sketch. Not a diagram of a well this time. A map. The forests around Willow Valley. Trails. Hills. Ravines. Places to hide. Places to set up camp. Places to ambush the enemy so he'd have no choice. He didn't yet know why he was drawing this. No, he did know. He'd known ever since Kenneth said that a longbow was a weapon of war. War is coming. No question about it. The question is when, and whether he'll be ready. Brother Cosma was gone, but he left silence in his wake. Not the kind of silence that comes with peace. A different kind. A heavy one. The village tiptoed through its days. People looked over their shoulders. Conversations in the square grew shorter. Laughter was rarer. Finn waited 2 weeks before reopening the clean house. Cautiously, without a sign, just the door open, and those in the know would know. The students returned on the 3rd day, all 10 of them, and 2 new ones. One was from the village over the hill. The other was a boy from the valley named Greer, 16 years old, quiet, with long arms and calm eyes. He came and said he wanted to learn how to shoot. Finn asked why. Greer said his brother had been hanged for a hair 2 years ago, and that he didn't want that to happen to anyone else. Finn didn't ask what exactly the boy meant. He took him on. Summer was drawing to a close, and the world around Ivy Valley was changing faster than Finn had anticipated. The tax collectors arrived on the 1st day of August, 3 of them, on horseback, wearing Lord Hawthorne's colors, yellow and black. The eldest of them, a burly man named Tarek, dismounted in the square and read the decree aloud. Double the tax, grain, livestock, cloth. Anyone who failed to pay would lose their allotment and be forced to work for the Lord until the debt was paid off. The village stood in silence. Bren stood at the front and nodded. He already knew. He always knew in advance because he kissed up to the right people. Finn stood in the crowd. He listened. He calculated. A double tax meant that every household would have to give up half of its winter supplies. For families who were already barely making it through to spring, this was a death sentence. Not immediate. Slow. Hunger weakens the body. A weakened body cannot fight off disease. The next wave of typhus would come in the winter, and there would be no one left to fight it. He did the math in his head. If the tax were collected in full by March, 10 to 15 people in the village would die. Not from disease, from starvation and its consequences. Children first, the elderly second. Everything he'd done over these past months, a clean house, boiled water, salves and decoctions, none of it was worth anything if people had nothing to eat. Tarek collected the taxes over 3 days, methodically, yard by yard. Finn saw women carrying out sacks of grain and crying silently. He saw an old man give up his last chicken and sit on his doorstep with a vacant stare. He saw a mother of 3 stand before the collector and say she had nothing, and Tarek reply that, in that case, she would go work for the Lord, and the children with her. Finn stood and watched. His fists were clenched. His teeth were gritted. Sadie stood beside him. She was silent, too. Then she said quietly that something had to be done. Finn said yes. We have to, but not now. Not like this. Not head on. The collectors left. The village was left stripped bare, like a tree after a storm. Finn gathered his students that very evening, not in a clean house, in the woods, in a clearing beyond the ravine. 12 people. Sadie, Roddy, Greer, the rest. He said they needed meat, lots of meat, enough for the whole village, until spring. And that meat could only be found in one place, in Lord Hawthorne's forest. Silence. Roddy said they'd be hanged for this. Finn said people die of starvation too, just more slowly. Greer said nothing. He just nodded. Finn laid out the plan. No raids, no robbery. A system. He divided the forest into sections. Every week, they'd hunt in a new section. Never kill more than 3 animals per outing. Never leave any traces. Bury the bones and hides far from the village. Cut up the meat in the woods and bring it back already cut. No carcasses in plain sight. Change trails every time. Go in pairs. One shoots, the other keeps watch. Kenneth would provide cover. Haldor would turn a blind eye to the nearby forest. They'd have to figure out the distant one on their own. They started 2 days later. Finn and Greer were the first pair. Kenneth led the way as a scout. Finn taught Greer as they went along, how to move quietly, how to read tracks, and how to choose a shooting position. Greer was a quick learner, not as fast as Sadie in the grass, but tenacious. His shooting was average for now, but he improved every day. The first week they bagged 2 deer and 4 hares. Finn distributed the meat to the households, quietly, at night, without explanation. By morning, 6 homes had breakfast. People didn't ask where it came from. They knew. They kept quiet. The second week, they expanded their circle. Roddy and a guy named Carl were the second pair. Finn sent them to the western part of the forest. He gave them instructions. They brought back 3 hares and a partridge. Not perfect. Roddy missed twice, and they lost 1 arrow. But there was meat. By the end of August, the system was working. 4 pairs of hunters. Meat every week. Not much, but enough so that no one in the village went to bed on an empty stomach. Finn distributed the game through Isla. His mother went from house to house and left bundles. No one thanked him out loud. Everyone understood that a word spoken aloud could reach ears that shouldn't hear it. At the same time, Finn continued working on his bow. His first U bow blank was drying under his roof. He checked it every day. He felt the wood. He looked for cracks. He waited. A bow doesn't tolerate haste. Bend it too soon and it will break. Wait too long and it will dry out. He knew the timeline. At least 2 months for rough drying, then shaping, then impregnating it with fat, then stringing. The first longbow would be ready by mid-fall, if all goes well. In mid-August, something happened that Finn hadn't planned on. A girl was riding through the Valley of the Willows, on horseback, alone. That in itself was strange. A woman alone on a horse, on a road in the middle of nowhere. The horse was a good one. The saddle was expensive. Her clothes were worn, but you could tell they had once been expensive. She stopped in the square and asked for water. Bren gave her water. The girl drank her fill. Then she started coughing, for a long time, deeply. The kind of cough Finn would recognize with his eyes closed. A wet cough, with a wheeze as she inhaled. Pneumonia, or the early stages of it. He walked over. He asked how long she'd been coughing. The girl looked down at him from her horse. Dark hair, a pale face, delicate features, eyes gray and cold. She said it was none of his business. Finn said she was sick, that she had pneumonia, that if left untreated, in a week she wouldn't be able to sit in the saddle. The girl looked at him. Then she coughed again. The cough bent her in half. She barely managed to stay in the saddle. Finn waited. She straightened up. She wiped her mouth. A pink streak remained on the back of her hand, blood in her phlegm. Finn said she needed to get off the horse. Right now. The girl gave her name. Lorelei Ashford, daughter of Sir Garrett Ashford, a knight. She said it as if the name were supposed to mean something. Maybe it did. To someone. To Finn, it meant only that he was looking at a noblewoman with pneumonia. He said he didn't care whose daughter she was. She needed to lie down, drink hot herbal tea, and breathe in the steam. Otherwise, in 3 days, blood would appear constantly in her phlegm, and then it would be too late. Lorelei dismounted, not because she was obeying him, but because her legs wouldn't hold her. Finn caught her by the elbow when she staggered. He led her into a clean house. He helped her lie down. Isla brought a hot decoction of mint and yarrow. Finn added honey. He made Lorelei drink it. Then he covered her and told her to breathe over a pot of boiling water. Steam inhalation, the simplest remedy for inflammation of the upper respiratory tract. Lorelei lay there staring at the ceiling. Then she asked quietly who he was. Finn said he was a country boy. Lorelei said that country boys didn't know the word pneumonia. Finn didn't answer. He treated her for 4 days. Herbal teas, steam, honey, a warm drink every 2 hours, chest compresses. The fever that set in on the 2nd day was brought down with willow bark. Lorelei was a difficult patient, not in a medical sense, in a human sense. She wasn't used to lying down. She wasn't used to being told what to do. She wasn't used to rough fabrics, earthen floors, or the smell of herbs. She tried to get up on the 2nd day, and Finn sat her back down. She argued. He told her she could either argue or breathe, and she had to choose one. Lorelei fell silent. She looked at him with the expression people have when they first meet someone who won't back down. On the 3rd day, the fever subsided. On the 4th, she sat up and ate broth, and she talked. A lot. Finn learned that her father was ill. Consumption. He'd been coughing up blood for a year. That she was taking him to a healer in the city but had no money. That the Ashford estate was ruined. The land was mortgaged. The servants had left. All that remained were she, her father, and an old maid. She explained that she had ridden through the Valley of the Willows because it was the shortest route to the highway, and that if she hadn't stopped for water, she would have fallen off her horse 10 miles down the road. Finn listened. He thought. Consumption in this world meant death, tuberculosis, without antibiotics, without isoniazid and rifampicin. He couldn't cure tuberculosis with willow bark. He couldn't. But he could ease the suffering. He could slow it down. He could buy some time. He told Lorelei that if she brought her father, he'd examine him. He told her honestly that he couldn't promise a cure, but he could try to make him feel better. Lorelei looked at him for a long time. Then she said she'd be back. On the 5th day, she left. Finn stood in the square and watched as the horse carried her down the road over the hill. Sadie stood beside him and said the noblewoman was beautiful. Finn said the noblewoman was sick. Sadie snorted and said one didn't preclude the other. Finn didn't answer. September brought cold nights and new problems. A man came from the village across the river, thin, ragged. He was carrying a child in his arms, a girl of about 4, unconscious. He said he'd been walking for 2 days, that everyone in his village knew about the boy who heals, that his daughter had been running a fever for 3 days, and that the midwife had told them to prepare a coffin. Finn took the girl. Typhus. 7th day. Severe case. Intestinal complications. He treated her for 3 days, without leaving her side. Sadie kept watch nearby. She changed the rags. She gave her water. On the second night, the girl began to delirium and call for her mother. Her mother had died a year ago. Finn held her hand and told her that her mother was nearby. He was lying. But a child in a delirium doesn't need the truth. On the third day, the fever broke. The girl opened her eyes. She saw an unfamiliar ceiling, an unfamiliar face. She began to cry. Finn called her father. Autumn settled over the valley of the willows with damp mists and early twilight. The leaves had fallen. The forest stood bare, and you could see right through it. Hunting had become more difficult. Without foliage, there was nowhere to hide. Every step could be heard. Finn rearranged his schedule, hunting only in the pre-dawn hours, only in the fog, only in the deep forest, where the trees stand thick and the underbrush still provided cover. The catch became scarcer, but didn't stop. The bow was ready, his first longbow. Finn finished it in early October. Ash, not yew. The yew blank was still drying and wasn't ready, but ash would do. Not ideal, heavier, less flexible, but good enough for a first attempt. He shaped the wood with a knife and a scraper. 3 days. In the morning until dawn, and in the evening until dark. He rounded the grip to fit his palm. He tapered the shoulders toward the ends. He treated it with fat. He strung a bowstring made of twisted flax. Ben made arrowheads, 6 of them, long, narrow, armor-piercing type, though Finn didn't explain to the blacksmith what that shape was for. He said it was for large game. Ben looked at the arrowheads. He looked at Finn. He said nothing. He took his first shot in a clearing beyond the village, early in the morning, alone, no one around. He drew the bowstring. His body tensed. This bow was 3 times heavier than a hunting bow. His hands began to tremble halfway through the draw. He pulled it back, barely. He aimed at a target 50 paces away. He exhaled. Release. The arrow flew off with a whistling sound he'd never heard from a hunting bow, the sound of air tearing through. The arrow struck a sheaf of straw and passed right through it. It entered on one side and exited on the other. Finn stood there, staring at the hole in the target. Then he looked at his hands. They were trembling. His fingers were red from the bowstring. His shoulder ached. His body was too weak for this weapon. He needed to build up his strength. Months of training. But the bow worked. At 60 paces, the arrow pierced the sheath. At 100, it sank in up to the fletching. At 120 paces, it hit a target the size of a human torso. That was twice as far as the hunter's shot, and twice as powerful. Kenneth arrived on the 3rd day. He asked to try it. He drew the bow. He was stronger than Finn, a grown man with a hunter's hands. He drew the bow all the way back. He shot. The arrow flew 150 paces and lodged in the trunk of an oak tree to the depth of a finger. Kenneth lowered the bow. He stood in silence. Then he said that with a bow like that, you could hit a horseman before he rode within spear's range. Finn said that was the whole point. Kenneth looked at him. No smile, no surprise, with something resembling acceptance, like a man who had known for a long time that this conversation would happen. He said they needed more bows like this. Finn said they needed wood, lots of wood, and time. Kenneth said he knew where to get the wood. In the distant forest, there was a yew grove, old trees, thick ones, just what they needed. But it was Lord Hawthorne's land, and the penalty for cutting down the forest was harsher than for poaching. Finn said they'd have to take the risk. The 2 of them went together. At night, they found the grove. Finn chose 6 trees, not the best ones, just average ones, so the felling wouldn't stand out. They cut them down. They cut them into sections right there on the spot. They carried them away in 3 trips. They hid them under a shed behind Kenneth's house. 6 future bows. After 3 months of drying, they'll become weapons. Finn began counting the men, not students, fighters. Greer was already a good shot. Not perfect, but consistent. He hit the target 50 paces away with a hunting bow, 9 times out of 10. Roddy was slightly worse, 8 out of 10. 3 other guys were catching up. Carl, Nathan, Mick, all villagers, all hungry, angry, and ready. 2 more had come from the neighboring village. Brothers, 16 and 18. The older one had scars on his back from whips. a punishment for failing to pay taxes. Finn took them in without a word. Training took place every evening, in any weather. Rain, fog, wind. Finn stood nearby and pushed them hard. He repeated the same things over and over. Exhale. Don't jerk. Smoothly. Elbow higher. Anchor at the cheekbone. One more time. More. One more. He knew these guys wouldn't become masters in a month, but he didn't need masters. He needed people who could hit a man-sized target at 50 paces, consistently, every time, without a miss. Tactics would take care of the rest. In mid-October, Lorelei returned, not alone, with her father. Sir Garrett Ashford was sitting in a wagon because he could no longer stay on a horse. Skinny as a skeleton covered in skin, his eyes were sunken. A cough tore at him every 2 minutes. Bloodstains were spreading on the rag he pressed to his mouth. Finn looked at him and understood everything in a second. Too late. End-stage tuberculosis. Cavities in his lungs. Maybe already disintegration. This man couldn't be saved. Not here, not with what he had. Lorelei stood next to the cart and looked at Finn. No tears, something worse than tears. Hope. Finn said he'd take his father to a clean house, that he'd do everything he could, but he was honest. He wasn't a fairy tale healer. He couldn't cure something that had gone this far. He could make sure it didn't hurt, that the remaining days would be free of suffering. Lorelei nodded. Her lips were pressed together. Her eyes were dry. Finn had placed Sir Garrett separately from the others, not because of his status, because of the contagiousness. Tuberculosis is transmitted through airborne droplets. He explained this to Lorelei without using technical terms. He said that her father's illness could spread to others through coughing. That's why he was in a separate room. A cloth over his face when anyone was nearby. Separate dishes. Lorelei listened. She didn't argue. She accepted it. Finn gave Sir Garrett a poppy seed decoction to ease his cough. Honey, a warm drink, broth, pain relief, everything he could. The old knight lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling. Then he looked at Finn. He said quietly that for the first time in a month, it didn't hurt to breathe. Finn said that was how it should be. Sir Garrett closed his eyes. His face bore an expression Finn had seen hundreds of times. The peace of a man who knows he is dying, but is no longer afraid. Lorelei hadn't left. Finn wasn't surprised. She'd stayed with her father. She helped keep the house clean, silently, without asking for anything or complaining. She made the beds, carried water, washed the dishes. A noblewoman in a simple dress, her hands red from the hot water. Sadie looked at her with suspicion, then with curiosity, then with respect. A week later, they were working side by side, and Sadie was teaching Lorelei to identify herbs, while Lorelei was teaching Sadie the alphabet. Finn watched this and thought that the world was full of strange things. The blacksmith's daughter and the knight's daughter were sitting on the floor of a clean house, taking turns writing with a stick in the sand. Sir Garrett lived for 3 weeks, quietly, pain-free. The poppy decoction and honey were doing their job. Finn checked on him every morning, changed his bandages, gave him something to drink, talked to him. The old knight turned out to be a smart man, well-educated. He told stories about the wars he'd fought in, about the king's court he'd seen in his youth, about the order of healers and their monasteries, about the politics that revolved around illness and health as if they were gold. Finn listened and memorized every word, every name, every detail about how power was structured in this world was a weapon no less effective than a longbow. Sir Garrett died at dawn, quietly, in his sleep. Lorelei sat beside him, holding his hand. When she realized he was no longer breathing, she didn't cry. She stood up. She went out into the courtyard. She stood in the rain for 10 minutes. Then she came back and told Finn that her father had been a good man, that he deserved a better world. Finn said he knew. They buried Sir Garrett outside the village, on a hill. Kenneth, Greer, and Roddy dug the grave. Bran came and said a prayer, sort of. Lorelei stood over the grave and said nothing. Finn stood beside her. After the funeral, Lorelei came up to him and said she had nowhere to go. The estate was empty. The land was mortgaged. The creditors would take the house in a month. She had no family, no money, no future, but she had her hands, and her head, and 3 languages. She asked if she could stay. Finn said she could. Lorelei nodded. She went into the clean house. She grabbed a rag. She started mopping the floor. Sadie moved over and handed her a bucket. From that day on, there were 3 of them. November brought a cold snap. The first snow fell and didn't melt. The river froze over. The roads became difficult to travel. The village was preparing for winter, Finn's second winter in this world. He stood in the yard and counted, not money, people. There were now 15 students, 9 archers capable of hitting a target 50 paces away, 1 longbow, ready. The blanks for 6 more are still drying. Herbs have been harvested. Honey has been stockpiled. Bundles of willow bark hang under the roof of the clean house. Salted and smoked meat is in the cellar. Not much, but the village isn't starving, for now. He unfolded the map he had been drawing with charcoal on a board. He updated it every week. Trails, hills, ravines, distances, elevations, wind directions, where there are coniferous forests and where there are deciduous ones, where the swamp freezes over and where it doesn't, where a trail is visible from the road and where it's hidden. He didn't know when this path would come in handy. He knew it would come in handy. On December 1st, Mei Lin arrived. Finn wasn't expecting her. He didn't know about her. She appeared the way people do in this world, suddenly and in distress. The wagon was parked on the side of the road half a mile from the village. The horse was dead. It had broken its leg in a pothole on the road. A girl was sitting next to the wagon, 15 years old, dark skin, black hair in a long braid, clothes of a foreign cut, Southern style. She was sitting in the snow, motionless. Her eyes were open but empty, in shock. Finn saw her as he was heading out to hunt. He approached and knelt down beside her. She didn't react. He touched her hands. They were cold, the early stages of frostbite. How long had she been sitting there? He took off his jacket. He draped it over her. He called Kenneth. Together, they lifted her up and carried her to the village. She walked mechanically, like a doll. She didn't speak. In the clean house, Finn laid her down. He warmed her up. He gave her a hot herbal tea. He rubbed her hands and feet, slowly, carefully. First-degree frostbite. Her fingers turned red and began to ache. That's good. Pain means the nerves are alive. The tissue hasn't died. An hour later, she spoke. In a broken northern dialect with a soft southern accent. She said her name was Mei Lin Cho, that her father was a merchant, that they were traveling from the south, that bandits had attacked them at the pass, that her father. She fell silent. Finn didn't ask any questions. He knew what that silence meant. Later, he learned the details. Her father had been killed. The goods had been looted. She had fled with the wagon, which now contained nothing but herbs and spices. She'd been traveling for 3 days. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't slept. The horse had broken its leg. And she sat down in the snow and decided she couldn't go any further. Finn examined the wagon the next day. Together with Greer, they dragged it into the village. Inside, they found something that took Finn's breath away. Little bags. Dozens of little bags, filled with herbs he'd never seen up north, with tree bark that didn't grow here, spices, powders, dried flowers and roots. He opened one pouch after another and took in the scents. Cloves, turmeric, cinnamon, camphor, things that, in his past life, had cost mere pennies at the pharmacy. Here, they were worth more than gold. Camphor, a natural remedy for respiratory congestion. Turmeric, an anti-inflammatory. Cloves, a pain reliever for toothaches. And dozens more herbs he couldn't identify, but Mei Lin knew each one. When she had recovered enough to speak normally, Finn sat down next to her and asked her to tell him about each little bag. Mei Lin spoke for 2 hours. She named the herbs in the southern language. She explained what they were used for, how to prepare them, and what dosages to use. She knew this from her father, who had learned it from his father. Generations of herbal merchants from the south. Finn listened and felt something warm unfolding inside him. Hope. Not abstract, concrete. With these herbs, his arsenal doubled, tripled. Things he couldn't do before became possible. Pain relief during surgeries, anti-inflammatory remedies that worked faster than willow bark, fever reducers for children who couldn't drink bitter decoctions. He asked Mei Lin if she wanted to stay. She looked at him. A question lingered in her eyes. Why should she stay? Where would she go? Finn said there was a place for her here, that her knowledge was needed, that she could be the guardian of these herbs and teach him and others what she knew. Mei Lin asked what she would get in return. Finn set a roof over her head. Food, safety as much as he could provide, and people who wouldn't look at her as an outsider. Mei Lin was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly that nowhere in her life had she ever been called one of us. Not in the south, where her mother was from the north. Not in the north, where her father was from the south. Finn said that here, no one called her an outsider. Mei Lin nodded. She stayed. She settled into the clean house within a week. Quiet, precise, neat. She arranged her herbs on the shelves, labeled every little bag, showed Sadie how camphor works, showed Lorelei how to grind turmeric into powder. She worked silently and without stopping, like someone who's afraid that if she stops, she'll be... Sadie was the first to notice it. One morning, when Mei Lin was grinding the already clean herbs for the third time, Sadie walked up to her and said that was enough, that no one was chasing her away, that she could sit down, drink the tea, and just relax. Mei Lin looked at her, then at Lorelei, then at Finn. Finn nodded. She sat down. She drank the tea, and for the first time in a week, she smiled. Subtly, barely noticeably, but she smiled. December was drawing to its midpoint. Winter was setting in, and along with the cold came people, from the village across the river, from the village to the west, a man with a frost-bitten hand, a woman with a child who had had diarrhea for a week straight, an old man with chest pain. Finn took everyone in. He treated them. He taught them. He explained. The same things to everyone. Key wash with water. Wash your hands. Don't drink from dirty wells. Keep the sick separate from the healthy. Simple things. Ancient things. Things that had been known in his native world for 150 years and that sounded like a revelation here. By New Year's, people from 7 villages had visited the clean house. 7 villages in the north knew Finn's name. The boy who heals. The boy who saves. Rumors spread faster than the wind, and along with the rumors came fear, not of Finn, for Finn. Haldor came before New Year's, serious, somber. He said that Lord Hawthorne knows, not everything, but enough. He knows that someone in Ivy Valley is healing people. He knows that peasants from other villages come here. For now, he doesn't care. He has a war on his hands, a tax to collect, the king's southern campaign. But when the war ends, he'll take notice. And then things will be bad. Finn thanked Haldor. Haldor left. Finn stood in the doorway of his clean house and looked out at the winter village. Smoke from the chimneys, snow on the roofs, silence. Macy was building a snowman in the yard, alive, rosy-cheeked, the girl who was supposed to have died a year ago. He looked at his hands, stronger than a year ago, calluses from the bowstring and from working with wood, hands that had stitched up wounds and carved a bow, the hands of a doctor and the hands of a hunter, one and the same. He went back inside. He sat down at the table with Sadie, Lorelei, and Mei Lin, the 4 of them. 3 girls and a 13-year-old boy with the eyes of a grown man. He told them they needed to expand. By spring, at the latest, each of the 7 villages that knew of him must have its own clean house, their own supply of herbs, their own trained person, one of his students, whom he'll train over the winter, so that when they come for him, the knowledge won't die with him. Sadie said there wouldn't be enough students. 15 people for 7 villages. That's 2 per village. Not enough. Finn said that meant they needed more students. Lorelei said they could write things down. She can read and write down the recipes, the dosages, the instructions, so that someone who hadn't studied under Finn could read them and follow them. Finn looked at her. Write it down. A book, a textbook. In a world without a printing press, handwritten, but practical. He said it was the best idea he'd heard in a year. Lorelei let herself smile. a small, satisfied smile. They started that very night. Lorelei wrote, Finn dictated. Sadie corrected him when he mixed up the local names of herbs. Mei-Lin added southern recipes. Page 1. How to boil water and why. Page 2. How to make a salt solution. Page 3. Willow bark. Dosages. Method of preparation. For adults and for children. Page 4. Treating wounds. Honey. Boiled water. Stitches. They wrote until dawn. The candle burned out. They lit a second one. Lorelei wrote in beautiful, even handwriting on parchment that Finn had traded for 2 rabbit pelts from a merchant. By morning, 12 pages were ready. The world's first medical textbook, Erwin, written by a doctor from another universe, on the kitchen table, by candlelight, in a village of 40 households. The winter of the second year was milder than the first. Less snow, lighter winds. The village breathed more easily. Not a single child had died by mid-January. Finn marked this not with a celebration, but with a tally. By this time last year, 4 had already been buried in the Valley of the Ivy. The year before that, 6. This year, 0. Numbers don't lie. Knowledge works. The manuscript was growing. Lorelei wrote every evening. By the end of January, it was 40 pages long. Finn dictated systematically. Section 1, Water and Hygiene. Section 2, Herbs and Decoctions. Section 3, Wounds and Stitches. Section 4, Childbirth Assistance. This section was the hardest for him, not because he didn't know the material. He did. Obstetrics had been part of his training. It was difficult because every line he dictated could save a life, or take one, if it were written down inaccurately, if the person reading it misunderstood. He repeated every phrase 3 times. He simplified it. He stripped away everything unnecessary. He left only what was absolutely essential. Clean hands, clean cloth, the position of the woman in labor, what to do if the baby is in a breech position, what to do in case of bleeding, when to call Finn, when not to try to handle it on your own. The last point was the most important, knowing one's limits. In early February, he sent off his first students. Sadie and Roddy set out for the village across the river, a 2-day journey. They took with them a copy of the manuscript, 30 pages transcribed by Lorelei as a second copy, a bag of herbs, tools, sewing needles, horsehair thread, honey in a pot. Finn saw them off to the edge of the forest. Sadie stood before him with the bag slung over her shoulders, red-haired, freckles, serious eyes. She had changed over the past year. She'd filled out. She'd matured. No longer a girl, a young woman, with hands that knew how to stitch up wounds, deliver babies, and distinguish 20 kinds of herbs by their scent. Finn told her she was ready, that he trusted her, that if something happened that she didn't know how to handle, she shouldn't try to guess. She should only do what she was sure of. Sadie said he sounded like an old man. Finn said he was an old man, just a little one. Sadie snorted. Then she looked at him for a long time. Then she turned and walked away. Roddy followed her. She didn't look back. Finn stood there watching them walk away down the white trail. Macy tugged at his sleeve and asked why Sadie had left. Finn said that Sadie had gone to help people in another village. Macy thought for a moment and said that was fine then, because helping is good. Then she took a pebble out of her pocket and held it out to Finn. She said it was for the pain, like the ones she used to hand out to the sick at the clean house. Finn took the pebble. He clenched it in his fist. A 34-year-old doctor in the body of a 14-year-old boy, with a pebble for pain in his pocket. In February, he sent off 2 more pairs, Greer and a girl named Fiona, to a village to the west, Carl and Nathan to a village to the north, each pair with a copy of the manuscript and a supply of herbs, each with instructions, each with a strict order. Do not draw attention to yourselves. Do not argue with the local midwives. Do not mention Finn by name. Just help, quietly, without fuss. By March, 3 villages besides Ivy Valley had their own clean houses. Small, modest, but functional. Sadie sent word through a merchant. She had delivered a baby. The mother was alive. The child was alive. She had written this on a scrap of parchment in 2 lines of clumsy handwriting she'd learned from Lorelei. Finn read it and stood there with the scrap in his hand for 10 minutes. Then he hid it. Meanwhile, another woman appeared in the clean house. She had come on foot, in worn-out sandals, through the snow, a gray habit tied with a rope, thin, a head taller than Finn, calm eyes, a quiet voice. Sister Evelyn Marsh, a former nun. She was 26. She asked for water. Ayla gave it to her. Evelyn drank it. Then she asked if it was true that there was a boy here who healed people. Finn stood by the wall and looked at her. A nun, the church, the Inquisition, Cosma. He tensed, but something in her eyes stopped him. Not cunning, not calculation, exhaustion. That deep exhaustion he'd seen in the mirror every morning in his past life after 36-hour shifts. Burnout. He recognized it instantly. Evelyn told him briefly. 10 years at the monastery hospital. She treated the nobility. Children were dying at the gates because no one would let them in. She let them in. She was expelled. She wandered for 3 years. She treated people as best she could, with prayers and scraps of knowledge stolen from the monastery library. She heard about Finn from a man in the village across the river, the very same man whose daughter he had saved that fall. She walked for a month. Finn asked what she could do. Evelyn said she could read in 2 languages, that she knew anatomy from the monastery treatises, that she knew how to stitch up wounds. Not very well, but she could do it. That she'd delivered 30 babies. Finn asked how many had survived. Evelyn said 21 mothers and 23 children. Finn did the math. A 70% survival rate for the mothers. For this world, that's a good result. Very good. Even without boiled water or clean hands. So the woman has a head on her shoulders. He said he'd take her on, but he warned her. There are no prayers here. Here, there are herbal decoctions, boiling water, and hand washing. If she's ready to forget what she was taught in the convent and learn all over again. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Then she said quietly that she'd already forgotten. 3 years ago, when she was standing at the convent gates and watched as a child was carried away dead because his mother was a peasant and not a countess. Finn nodded. Evelyn became the 6th in his inner circle. Isla, Sadie, Lorelei, Mei Lin, now Evelyn. She was the oldest, calm, with the kind of patience that comes after a person has lost everything they believed in and found something new. She didn't ask how Finn knew what he knew. She didn't ask why a 13-year-old boy spoke like a grown man. She just worked. She taught. She healed. She slept 4 hours a day and didn't complain. Finn put her in charge of obstetrics. She read the manuscript. She asked questions. Smart questions. The right ones. The kind asked by people with experience, not just book knowledge. She asked why hands should be washed before delivery, not after. Finn explained. She asked why the baby should be placed on the mother's stomach immediately, not an hour later. Finn explained. She asked why the umbilical cord should be cut with a clean knife, when people had been cutting it with whatever was at hand their whole lives. Finn explained. Each time she listened. She nodded. She asked the next question. A week later, she knew the manual by heart. 2 weeks later, she delivered a baby according to the new rules. The mother survived. The baby survived. Evelyn walked out of the house where she'd delivered the baby. Her hands were wet. Her eyes were red. She approached Finn and whispered a single sentence. She said she thought she was looking for God, but it turned out she was looking for a job that God was supposed to do. Finn didn't answer. He didn't need to. March brought a thaw, and with the thaw, Sadie returned. She had lost weight and was tanned by the winter wind. Spring of the 2nd year. The snow had melted. The earth breathed dampness and warmth. The trees were swelling with buds, and the world beyond the Valley of the Willows began to remind itself. Lord Hawthorne was the first to remind them, not in person, through a messenger. A rider in yellow and black arrived in the morning and handed Bran a letter. Bran couldn't read. He brought the letter to Lorelei. She read it aloud. Lord Kirvin Hawthorne informed the inhabitants of the Valley of the Willows that, in accordance with the king's decree regarding the maintenance of the Southern Army, the tax would be tripled. Payment was due in a month. Anyone who failed to pay would forfeit their land and become the Lord's serf. Lorelei finished reading and placed the letter on the table. Her face was pale. Finn stood by the wall. He read it. A tripled tax. This isn't starvation. This is annihilation. The village will simply cease to exist as a free settlement. Everyone will become Hawthorne's serfs, slaves in essence. And not just the Valley of the Willows, all the villages on his lands. Bran sat there sweating. He muttered that they had to pay, that you couldn't go against the Lord, that if they didn't pay, soldiers would come. Finn asked how many soldiers Hawthorne had. Bran looked at him as if he were mad. He said he didn't know. A lot. Finn turned to Lorelei. She knew more. Her father had told her. She said that Hawthorne had a standing retinue of 40 mounted knights, plus a foot militia he could rally, 200 to 300 men, plus mercenaries if he paid them. Finn nodded. 40 on horseback, 200 on foot, against his 9 archers with hunting bows and 1 longbow. The numbers weren't in his favor, but he wasn't planning to fight. Not yet. He was planning to negotiate. He went to see Haldor. The gamekeeper listened. He shook his head. He said the Lord didn't negotiate with peasants. Finn said the Lord didn't with peasants who have nothing to offer. But he did. He asked Haldor if anyone at the Hawthorne estate was ill. Haldor paused. Then he said the Lord's wife, Lady Margaret, had been suffering from stomach pains for half a year. A healer from town had said there was nothing he could do, just pray and wait. Finn asked what the symptoms were. Haldor described them as best he could. Pain after eating, vomiting. She'd lost a lot of weight. Yellow skin, Finn thought. Pain after eating, vomiting, jaundice, weight loss, gallstones, or worse. But most likely gallstones. If it was gallstones, he could help. Without surgery. No. Without anesthesia and a sterile operating room, that would be murder. But a diet, herbs, relaxing the bile ducts, reducing inflammation. A small stone might pass on its own, if he's lucky. Finn told Haldor that he wanted to see Lady Margaret. Haldor said he'd gone mad, that a peasant boy wouldn't be allowed into the Lord's estate, that he'd be hanged at the gate. Finn said that Haldor would pass on one phrase to the Lord, that in Ivy Valley there is someone who cured the Lord's gamekeeper's son and 30 people of creeping fever, and that he's willing to examine the Lord's wife. For free, if the Lord allows it. Haldor stared at him for a long time. Then he left. 3 days of silence. Then Haldor returned. He said the Lord had agreed, not out of trust, out of desperation. He loves his wife. The healer hadn't helped. The monks hadn't helped. Maybe a peasant sorcerer would help. He had nothing to lose. Finn set out. He took Mei Lin with him. She needed southern herbs, which she knew better than he did. Lorelei wanted to go. Finn said no. A noblewoman from an impoverished family at the estate of a hostile lord? Bad idea. Lorelei didn't argue, but you could tell it cost her. The Hawthorne estate stood 10 miles from the village. Stone walls, a tower, a moat filled with water. Not a castle, a fortified manor. But for a peasant boy, it was another world. Guards at the gate, servants in the courtyard, stables, a kennel, the smell of fine food wafting from the kitchen. Finn walked across the courtyard and felt eyes on him, with contempt, with curiosity, with mockery. A peasant in a manor house. Mei Lin followed behind him, a dark-skinned southerner in unfamiliar clothes. People stared at them as if they were freaks at a fair. Lord Hawthorne met them in the hall. Finn saw him for the first time. Tall, lean, a stern face, cold eyes. Dressed simply for a nobleman. No gold, no embroidery. A man who doesn't hide behind luxury. That's bad. It means he's confident. Hawthorne looked down at Finn and said that if the boy touched his wife with his dirty hands, he would personally flog him. Finn said he wouldn't touch her with dirty hands. He asked for hot water and a clean cloth. A servant brought them. Finn washed his hands. For a long time. Thoroughly. Hawthorne watched. His expression didn't change, but something flashed in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Lady Margaret was lying in the bedroom, a beautiful woman. Or she had been beautiful. Now she was thin, sallow. Her eyes were sunken. Pain was evident in every wrinkle on her face. Finn approached. He introduced himself. He asked for permission to examine her. Lady Margaret looked at her husband. Hawthorne nodded. Finn placed his hands on her abdomen, gently, carefully. The right upper quadrant. He pressed down. The lady flinched in pain. An enlarged gallbladder. Tender, yellow skin. Courvoisier's sign. A stone in the common bile duct. A large one, blocking the flow of bile, hence the jaundice and pain. Finn asked about her stool. The lady looked embarrassed. Finn said it was important. She said it was colorless, almost white. Finn nodded. Obstructive jaundice. A stone has blocked the duct. Bile isn't reaching the intestines. Without surgery, back in his home world, she would have undergone endoscopic retrograde cholangiography and had the stone removed in an hour. Here, he had herbs and knowledge, and the hope that the stone wasn't too large. He turned to Hawthorne. He said he saw the problem, that a stone had formed in a stone had formed, a small one, which is preventing her body from functioning properly, that he couldn't remove the stone, but he could try to make it pass on its own, with herbs, diet, time. Hawthorne asked how long. Finn said a month. Maybe 2. Hawthorne asked what if it didn't work. Finn said that then he'd be honest. Hawthorne was silent. Then he said, a month. Yes, a month it is. Finn nodded. He turned to Mei Lin. She was already taking what they needed out of the bag. Turmeric, Immortelle from the local supply, mint. Finn drew up a treatment plan. A decoction of turmeric and Immortelle 3 times a day. A warm heating pad on her right side. A low-fat diet. No meat, broth, porridge, boiled vegetables, and plenty of water. Lots and lots of water. He explained everything to Lady Margaret's maid. He repeated it 3 times. He made her repeat it back to him. He left behind the little bags of herbs and a note with the dosages that Lorelei had written out in advance. Before leaving, Hawthorne stopped him. He asked what the boy wanted in return for the treatment. Finn looked him in the eye. He said he wanted the triple to become standard, a single dose, for the Valley of the Willows and for all the villages on Hawthorne's lands. Hawthorne didn't bat an eye. He called him a cheeky boy. Finn said he was hungry, just like his village. Hawthorne said that if his wife got better, he'd think about it. Finn said that was enough. They left. On the way back, Mei Lin was silent almost the entire way. Then she said quietly that Finn was either very brave or very foolish. Finn said that, in his experience, the two were hard to tell apart. For the first time since he'd known her, Mei Lin laughed. 2 weeks later, a messenger arrived from the manor. Lady Margaret was feeling better. The pain was less frequent. Her complexion was clearing up. She was eating more. The Lord requested more herbs. Finn sent a double portion with Mei Lin. A month later, Haldor arrived with news. Lady Margaret had gotten out of bed for the first time in 6 months. She took a walk in the garden. She ate at the common table. Lord Hawthorne doesn't smile in public, but the servants say he's become quieter, gentler. And one more thing, the tax. For Ivy Valley, the tax remains at the single rate. For the other villages, no changes. Finn accepted this. It wasn't ideal, but his village was saved. The others, he'd figure out how to help the others. Later. Right now, something else was more important. Lord Hawthorne was no longer an enemy. Not a friend, but not an enemy. A man whose wife was alive thanks to a peasant boy. That was worth more than any gold. Finn stood in the courtyard and looked out at the village. Spring, greenery, children in the streets, laughter. A year ago, there had been fear and hunger here. Now there was fear too, but a different kind. The fear of losing what they had built. And this fear was better than the first, because it meant there was something to lose. The summer of the second year brought heat and change. Finn stood in a clearing beyond the village and watched 20 people with bows. Not 10, like in the winter, 20. From 4 villages. Boys and girls between the ages of 14 and 20. Thin, tanned, angry. Each had come here for their own reason. One's brother had been hanged for stealing a hare. Another's mother had died of typhus because they couldn't afford a priest. A third had his cow taken as tribute, and his sister didn't survive the winter. Finn didn't ask for reasons. He looked at their hands. If their fingers were strong and their eyes were calm, he'd take them. 3 longbows were ready by midsummer. Yew, dry, soaked in fat, beautiful. Finn spent a week's worth of handwork on each one. He tailored the grip to each specific archer. Not just any grip, a grip for Greer, a grip for Kenneth, to suit Bridie's hand. Bridie had appeared at the beginning of summer. Finn had found her in the woods. Or rather, she had found him. He was checking the snares on the far trail when he sensed someone following him. He stopped. He waited. A girl emerged from the bushes, tall, lean, weathered to the point of being blackened. Her hair was cut short with a knife. Pants, a deer-hide jacket, a bow on her back, a knife on her belt. Eyes like a she-wolf's. Not angry, alert. Ready for anything. She said he was walking on her trail. Finn said he didn't know the trail belonged to anyone. She said she knew now. Finn looked at her bow. Short, homemade, rough, but well-maintained. The bowstring was fresh. The arrows were straight. Someone who takes care of her weapons. He asked her name. She said Bridie. Finn asked how long she'd been living in the woods. Bridie said 2 years. Ever since her father was hanged. Finn said he'd heard about her father, O'Reilly, a poacher who'd been caught with a deer, executed in front of his family. Bridie didn't answer, only her jaw tightened. Finn said he wasn't going to meddle in her life, but he had a proposal. She knew the woods better than anyone. He needed someone to teach his men how to move silently and find their way through the thicket. In return, a place to stay if she wanted it, food, and people who actually care about her. Bridie looked at him for a long time. Then she said she didn't need a roof over her head. Finn said that was fine, but the offer still stood. She left. She returned 3 days later, with a roe deer carcass slung over her shoulders. She dropped it in front of the clean house. She said it was payment for the first lesson. Finn didn't ask for details. He picked up the carcass. He called his students. Bridie began teaching them that very day, rigorously, no explanations. She demonstrated each move once. If anyone didn't remember, she repeated it once more. If they still didn't remember after the second time, she moved on. A week later, 5 of his archers were moving through the forest 3 times quieter than before. 2 weeks later, Greer could walk 20 steps across dry leaves without making a single crunch. Bridie didn't live in the village. She'd disappear into the woods for days. She'd come back. She'd bring meat. She'd teach. She'd leave again. Finn didn't ask where she'd been. He didn't try to keep her there. He just said every time she showed up that it was good she'd come back. At the end of summer, Bridie came back with a wound, an arrow in her shoulder, bandits. She didn't give any details. Finn didn't ask. He pulled out the arrowhead, rinsed the wound with boiling water, sprinkled it with turmeric powder, stitched it up, bandaged it. Bridie sat on the bench and didn't make a sound. She just watched his hands at work. When he was done, she said he had good hands. Finn said she had a strong shoulder. Bridie snorted. It sounded like a laugh. From that day on, she started coming back more often. Fall brought a second encounter with Brother Cosma. Finn knew it would happen. He was waiting. He'd been preparing. But still, when Macy ran up and said that the gray-haired man had returned and brought friends, he felt a chill inside. 3 of them. Brother Cosma and 2 inquisitors in white robes bearing the symbol of the Bright Mother on their chests. A golden sun with an eye in the center. A full-scale inquisition. Not a traveling inspector, an investigative team. They set up camp in the chapel. They began their questioning. House by house, yard by yard. Methodically, quietly, politely. The same questions over and over. Is anyone in the village practicing medicine? How do they treat people? Where did they learn it? Do they pray while doing so? Are they blessed by the church? The village fell silent. Finn gathered his inner circle that night, in the forest, far from the village. Sadie, Lorelei, Maylin, Evelyn, Bridie, Kenneth, Greer. Haldor came on his own, uninvited. Finn explained the situation. If the Inquisitors find evidence that he heals without prayer, they'll burn him, or hang him, or both. And not just him. His students, too. Everyone connected to the Pure House. They need to cover all their tracks, hide the manuscript, move the herbs into the woods, close the Pure House and restore it to the state of an empty cabin. Lorelei said there was a problem. People. Dozens of people in the 7 villages he'd treated. Who know, who saw. The Inquisitors will find witnesses. They'll find those who'll talk, out of fear or out of spite. Mara will definitely talk. Finn said he knew, that he was counting on something else, on Lorelei. She's a noblewoman, a knight's daughter. Her word carries more weight than that of a peasant. If she tells the Inquisitors that she was the one who treated the people, using the knowledge she gained at the monastery school, and that Finn, the boy, was simply helping her carry water, it would be harder for the Inquisitors to accuse a noblewoman than a peasant. Not impossible, but harder. Lorelei was silent. Then she said that was a lie, and that if she were caught lying, it would be the end for her, too. Finn said he knew, that he wasn't asking, he was offering. She could refuse. Lorelei looked at him, at Sadie, at Evelyn with her tired, kind eyes, at Mei Lin, who was clutching a little bag of herbs as if it were all she had left in the world. She said she wouldn't lie. She said she would tell the truth, that she was a healer, that her father had taught her, that she healed with herbs and prayer, and that a boy named Finn helped her. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. Her father had indeed told her about herbs. She had indeed known a thing or two before meeting Finn. She just hadn't known how to do it like this. Finn nodded. Enough. Lorelei met with her brother Cosma the next day, in the chapel, alone. They talked for an hour. Finn waited outside, sitting on a rock, hands on his knees. His heart beat steadily. He'd learned that in the ICU, when everything depends on someone else and there's nothing you can do. Just breathe. Lorelei came out. Her face was pale but calm. She said that Cosma had listened. He took notes. He asked questions. She answered, calmly, without fuss, like a noblewoman before a church official, with dignity. Cosma asked about the clean house. She said she'd set it up as a shelter for the sick, modeled after the monastery hospital where her father had been treated. Cosma asked about the boy Finn. She said he was the son of a local peasant woman. He helps her, carries water, gathers herbs. A sensible child, nothing more. Cosma smiled, that smile that doesn't reach the eyes. He took notes. He thanked her. The Inquisitors stayed in the village for 5 days. They questioned 30 people. Finn didn't know what people were saying. He couldn't control it. He could only hope. On the 5th day, Cosma came to see him, alone, without his assistants. He sat down on the bench in front of the house. He looked at Finn. He was silent for a long time. Then he said it was an interesting village, that people here get sick less often than else in the north, that the water was clean, that the children were healthy, that the well was covered with a grate, and that all this had started happening after a boy named Finn allegedly began helping a visiting noblewoman gather herbs. Finn remained silent. Cosma said he wasn't a fool, that he could see a trail where people were trying to cover it up, but that he had no proof. There were the peasant's words, which were confused and contradictory. There was the noblewoman's word, and there was a 14-year-old boy who looked at him as if he were 40, not 14. Then Cosma stood up. He said he was leaving, that the report would be lenient, not because he believed in Finn's innocence, because there were no dead children here. And this was the only village in the north where there weren't any, and he didn't want to be the one to change that. But he said one more thing. He said that next time he might not come alone, but with those to whom don't care about dead children, and that Finn had better be ready for that. He left. Finn sat on the bench and watched as 3 gray figures disappeared down the road behind the hill. His hands were shaking. For the first time in months, not from the cold, from the tension finally easing. Macy came out of the house. She sat down next to him. She leaned against his side. She asked if the scary man had left. Finn said he had. Macy said that was good, because he looked at everyone like a doctor. Finn asked what she meant. Macy said it was as if he were looking for where it hurt. Finn hugged her with one arm. He thought that his 8-year-old sister had just described an inquisitor more accurately than any textbook. Winter of the 3rd year began early. The first snow fell in late October and never melted. Finn stood in Ben's smithy and watched as the old blacksmith forged spearheads, not for hunting, for battle. Long, narrow, with edges sharp enough to cut through chainmail. Ben worked in silence. He had long since stopped asking why. There were 120 arrowheads, 20 for each of the 6 finished longbows. 2 more, nearly finished, lay on the workbench nearby. That made 8. Finn was customizing each one for a specific archer. Greer's bow was slightly longer and softer, because Greer shot with his left arm extended. Bridie's bow was shorter and stiffer, because she was stronger than most of the guys, and drew it up to her ear. Kenneth's bow was the heaviest. The old hunter drew it without effort, and hit a target the size of a head from 180 paces away. By midwinter, 6 bows were in the archer's hands, training every evening, in the cold, in the snow. Their fingers turned blue. The bowstrings froze. Finn stood nearby and urged them on. More. One more time. To the right. Higher. Breathe. Don't flinch. During the day, he treated patients. The stream of patients never stopped. People came from distant villages, with children, with the elderly, with wounds, illnesses, and fears. The clean house was operating at full capacity. Evelyn assisted with childbirth. Over the winter, she delivered 11 babies, all alive. All the mothers survived, 11 out of 11, in a world where only 1 in 2 survived. Sadie ran the herbal pharmacy and taught. She had 8 students. Each knew 20 decoctions by heart. Mei-Lin managed the supplies. The southern herbs were running out, and there was nothing to replace them with. But she found local substitutes for half of them. She replaced turmeric with dandelion root. Not as strong, but it works. She replaced camphor with fir resin. It's crude, but it's good enough for inhalations. Lorelei was writing. The manuscript had grown to 120 pages, a full-fledged textbook, 7 copies, 1 for each village in the network. Finn reread and edited it. He removed the unnecessary parts. He added new ones. A section on wound surgery, a section on childhood illnesses, and a section on infectious diseases. Every word was carefully checked. Every dosage was verified. In January, news arrived from the capital. Lorelei found out through a merchant who was transporting fabrics to the fair. The Order of Healers was concerned. Archmage Ezekiel Wayne had received a tip-off about a peasant who was treating typhus with a bark decoction. Not just one tip-off, several, from various sources. Wayne launched an investigation. Not with inquisitors, with his own person, his best student, Iris Caldwell. Finn listened and nodded. He knew this would happen. The Order of Healers held a monopoly on medicine, and he was breaking that monopoly. Every child saved was a blow to their authority. Every clean house was a stronghold on their territory. They couldn't ignore it. Iris arrived at the end of February, on horseback, alone, tall, fair-haired, back straight, a cold expression. Her clothes were expensive but practical. No jewelry, thin leather gloves, the hands of a healer. Finn recognized them immediately. She dismounted in the square and asked where she could find the healer. Bren hesitated. He pointed to a clean house. Iris walked in without knocking. Finn was standing at the table. Lying in front of him was an 8-year-old boy with a cut on his arm, deep, down to the bone. Finn was washing the wound with boiling water. The boy was whimpering. Sadie was holding him by the shoulders. Iris stopped in the doorway. She watched. Finn didn't turn around. He finished rinsing the wound. He applied honey. He began to stitch it up. Horsehair. Small, even stitches. A knot. Trimming. A bandage. The boy stopped whimpering. Finn let him go. Then he turned to Iris. He asked how he could help. Iris introduced herself. She didn't hide who she was. She didn't hide why she'd come. She spoke plainly. She was there on behalf of Archmage Wayne to investigate reports of illegal healing. Finn said she should go ahead and investigate. He had nothing to hide. Iris raised an eyebrow. Finn showed her the spotless house, shelves of herbs, tools, a manuscript. He opened the last one and placed it in front of her. He told her she could read it. Iris read for 3 hours, without looking up, turning the pages. She'd go back. She'd reread. Her expression changed. First skepticism, then interest, then something like bewilderment. She closed the manuscript. She looked at Finn. She asked how he knew about boiling water and the connection between dirt and disease. Finn said he'd observed. Those who drink clean water get sick less often. Those who wash their hands before childbirth lose fewer mothers. Simple observations. Iris said these weren't simple observations, that there was nothing like this in the Order's treatises, that the idea of invisible beings causing disease contradicted everything she'd been taught for 10 years. Finn said that results were more important than theory. Before her, right before his eyes, was a village where children didn't die in the winter. That was a fact. An explanation could wait. Iris was silent. Then she asked him to stay for a week, to see how he worked. Finn agreed. The week stretched into 2. Iris followed him like a shadow. She watched him treat patients, how he sewed, how he prepared decoctions, how he explained things to his students. She asked questions, dozens of questions, hundreds, smart questions, precise ones. She knew anatomy better than he did. She knew the Latin names for the muscles and bones of this world. She knew the properties of herbs he'd never even encountered. But her knowledge was like a building without a foundation. Many floors, but not a single supporting pillar. She knew what to do, but didn't understand why. Finn gave her that foundation. He explained the connection between dirt and infection. He explained the principle of rehydration. He explained why honey works as an antiseptic, why boiling kills germs, why clean hands save women in labor. Each time, Iris listened. She remained silent. She thought. Then she asked the next question. On the 10th day, she said one sentence to him. She said that in 10 years in the Order, no one had ever explained it to her. Just do it, because it's written in the treatise. For the first time, Finn explained to her why, and that changed everything. She wrote a report to the Archmage. Finn didn't know what was in it. Iris didn't show him, but she didn't leave. She said she was asking for permission to stay, to study. Finn understood what that meant. The Archmage's apprentice in his camp. She was either his greatest ally or his greatest spy. He looked at her healer's hands, at her eyes, which for the first time in 2 weeks held something other than ice. Curiosity, hunger, the kind of hunger people feel when they first discover that the world is bigger than they'd been told. He said she could stay. Spring of the 3rd year brought war. Not right away. First, rumors. Then, facts. 3 villages in the east of the Hawthorne lands refused to pay the triple tax. The people barricaded themselves in their homes. The tax collectors returned, empty-handed. The Lord sent a dozen soldiers. The soldiers burned down a granary in one village. They beat up the village headman in the second. In the third, the peasants met them with pitchforks and drove them back into the forest. The news spread through the district like wildfire. For the first time in living memory, the peasants had raised their hands against the Lord's men. Finn listened and kept track of the time. Hawthorne would respond. He had no choice but to respond. If one village rebelled and went unpunished, tomorrow they would all rebel. The Lord understood this. So he would send forces, not a dozen soldiers, a real force. A week later, Haldor brought confirmation. Lord Hawthorne is assembling a force, 40 cavalrymen, 200 infantrymen. He's heading for the eastern villages, to crush them, to burn them, to hang the ringleaders, as a warning, so the rest will remember. Finn called a council. Everyone was there. Sadie, Lorelei, Maylin, Evelyn, Bridie, Iris, Kenneth, Greer, and Haldor. There was only one question: what to do. We could do nothing. Eve Valley pays a single tax. They won't be touched. The eastern villages aren't their concern. We could sit and wait until Hawthorne hangs the rebels and returns home. Finn looked at their faces. Sadie, pale, angry. She knew people in those villages. Her students were there. Greer, a stony face. His brother and mother were in the second eastern village. Bridie, calm, but she was running her finger along the knife at her belt. Evelyn, quiet, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes closed, as if in prayer. Iris, upright, icy, but there was something new in her eyes, something that hadn't been there 2 months ago. Finn said he couldn't order anyone around, that it wasn't his decision. Everyone decides for themselves. Kenneth said there was nothing to decide. If Hawthorne burns the eastern villages, they'll be next. Not now, in a year, in 2. When Lady Margaret falls ill again and Finn is no longer needed, or when the Inquisition returns and it's more profitable for Hawthorne to hand them over than to defend them. Bridie put it more succinctly. She said that either they stand up now or they'll wait until they're hunted down one by one. Lorelei said there's a third way, not war, negotiations. She's a noble woman. She can speak to Hawthorne as an equal, offer terms. Finn shook his head. He said that Hawthorne wouldn't negotiate, not now. He'd already made up his mind. The army was assembled. To retreat would be to show weakness. The Lord would never show weakness in front of the peasants. Never. The only language he would understand was force, but not murder. Finn looked around at everyone. He said he had a plan. Hawthorne's army would march east along the only road. The road runs through a valley between two wooded hills. A bottleneck, 300 paces wide. The hills on either side are covered in forest. If archers are positioned on the slopes, the road becomes a corridor with no way out. He doesn't want to kill. He wants to stop them. To show Hawthorne that the cost of attacking the villages is higher than he's willing to pay. Kenneth asked how many archers were needed. Finn said he had 20 trained archers, 8 longbows. The rest have hunting bows. That's not enough against 240 men. But if we add tactics, ambushes on the road, pit traps, copper wire in the grass that Ben can forge in a week, and if we aim not at the crowd but at vulnerable spots, the back of the knee, the neck under the helmet, the armpit, places where armor offers no protection, if we wound rather than kill, if we show that every step through this valley comes at a cost in blood, then maybe it'll be enough. Iris said it was madness. 20 men against an army. Finn said he had memories in his head of battles where 100 archers in the right position had stopped 1,000 knights. Iris asked how a peasant boy could have memories of battles. Finn didn't answer. 3 weeks of preparation. Finn didn't sleep. 4 hours a day. The rest of the time was spent working. He walked the length of the valley on foot, every meter. He measured the distances in steps. He drew a map accurate down to the last tree. He marked out the positions. Here's Greer with 3 archers, left slope, 50 steps above the road. Here's Bridie with 4, right slope, in the bushes. Here's Kenneth, alone, with a longbow, at the top of the hill, long-range shot. His task? The first arrow. At the commander, at the horse, not at the man, at the horse. The horse falls. The commander is on the ground. The formation breaks. Barricades made of fallen trees blocked the road in 2 places. Can't get through on horseback. Dismount. They arrived at dawn. Finn lay at the top of the hill and looked down. The column stretched out along the road. The cavalry led the way. 40 horsemen in armor, yellow and black banners. Behind them, the infantry, row after row. Spears, shields. Helmets glinted dimly in the morning light. Over 200 men. The ground rumbled with their footsteps. Finn counted. He estimated the distances. The first horsemen were approaching the first barricade. 30 paces, 20, 10. The lead horseman saw the fallen trees blocking the road. He raised his hand. The column came to a halt. Silence. Only the horses snorted and the harnesses jingled. The commander said something to his companions. He turned his horse around. He looked at the slopes. Finn recognized him from Haldor's description. Not Hawthorne. His captain, Sir Duncan Reed, an experienced knight. He'd fought in the south. No fool. He was looking at the hills and sensing something. A professional's instinct. An ambush. But he didn't see it. Trees, bushes. 20 men lay motionless on the slopes. Bridie had been teaching them this for a month. To lie still. Don't breathe. Be part of the forest. Sir Duncan sent 2 horsemen to ride around the ambush. They veered off the road. The first horseman's horse stepped on a wire. It stumbled. The rider was thrown from the saddle, the clang of armor hitting the ground. The second horse shied. The formation stirred. Sir Duncan shouted a command. Finn raised his hand, lowered it. Kenneth's first arrow whistled from the top of the hill, 160 paces, a long yew bow. The arrow struck Sir Duncan's horse in the hindquarters. The horse reared up. The knight fell to the ground. A clang, a scream.
Chaos. Then the slopes came alive. 20 bows, 8 long ones, 12 hunting bows. Arrows flew down the slope. Finn stood behind a tree and did not shoot. He was counting, watching, directing, shouting commands. Greer to the left, Bridie on the right flank. The infantry is trying to flank them. Arrows rained down on their legs, just as he'd ordered.
The first infantryman fell with a scream, an arrow in his thigh. The second, the third. The knights dismounted. They struggled up the slope. Their armor snagged on the bushes. Their feet sank into the damp earth. Bridie and her 4 men met them halfway. From 30 paces, straight into the back of the knee, 2 knights collapsed. The rest retreated. Panic on the road. The infantry huddled together. An ambush ahead, an ambush behind. The second one had been taken down at night, behind their backs. Arrows rained down from above. Nowhere to go, nowhere to run. Finn counted the wounded. 8, 12, 20. Not a single dead man, yet. His men had shot accurately. They knew their anatomy. Thigh, shin, shoulder, vulnerable spots. Not fatal, but incapacitating. 40 minutes. It had lasted 40 minutes. Then Sir Duncan rose from the ground, without a horse, in crumpled armor. He took off his helmet, gray hair, a face glistening with sweat. He raised an unarmed hand. He shouted that he wanted to negotiate. Finn stepped out from behind the trees, alone. He walked down the slope. He stood before the knight. A 13-year-old boy. No, 15 to look at, but still a boy. Standing before a 40-year-old knight in armor. Sir Duncan looked at him. Then he said the boy needed to deliver a message to Lord Hawthorne. Finn said the message was simple. The villages are paying a single tax. Not triple, not double. A single tax. No one is being hanged. No one is being burned. In return, Finn is treating the wounded right now. Everyone. And he gave his word that he wouldn't lay a finger on a single soldier who left in peace. Sir Duncan looked at the wounded, at the moaning people on the road, at the knights with arrows in their legs, at the foot soldiers pressing down on their wounds. Then he looked up at the hillside, at the 20 men with bows. 20 against his 240. And those 20 had won, without a single casualty. He said he'd pass the message on. Finn nodded. He turned to his men. He shouted for them to bring water and rags. A clean battlefield. Sadie and Evelyn came down the slope carrying bags. Mei Lin followed them with herbs. Iris was last. She stood at the edge of the road and looked at the wounded, the people she could heal, the hands of a healer. She looked at Finn. He nodded. She knelt down in front of the first wounded infantryman and began to work. Finn worked for 6 hours, without stopping. 23 wounded. Arrows, bruises, fractures from falling off horses, dislocations. He treated wound after wound. He sutured. He bandaged. He administered painkillers, Mako's decoction, to everyone, friends and foes alike. Sadie assisted. Her hands were quick, precise. Not a girl, a woman, 16 years old, but the hands of a surgeon. Evelyn worked nearby, calm, methodical. Iris was at the other end of the road. For the first time in her life, she was treating patients not by the book, but using Finn's method. Boiled water, honey, stitches. No prayers, no rituals, just hands and knowledge. Hawthorne's soldiers lay on the road and watched as their enemies treated them. Some didn't believe it. Some were crying. One knight, with an arrow piercing his shin, asked Finn why. Why was he treating someone who had come to kill him? Finn said he wasn't treating the enemy. He was treating a human being. The knight fell silent. When Finn finished stitching the wound, the knight said quietly that he would remember this. By evening, the army had left, slowly, with the wounded on stretchers, without their banners, quietly. Sir Duncan was the last to leave. He turned around. He looked at Finn. He said one thing. He said the boy was either a saint or a madman, and that he himself didn't know which was worse. He left. Finn stood on the road. All around, blood on the ground and arrows trampled into the mud. His men were coming down from the hills. 20 men, not a single scratch. Greer approached. His face was ashen. His hands were shaking. His first battle. He said he'd never been so afraid in his life. Finn said that was normal. That fear meant you were normal. It's not normal when you're not afraid. Bridie approached silently. She put her hand on his shoulder. For a second, she took it away. She walked away. For her, it was the same as a hug. Macy ran out from behind the trees where she'd been hiding with Isla. She rushed toward Finn. She wrapped her arms around his waist. She said she'd heard the screams and that she'd been scared. Finn lifted her into his arms. She was heavy, 8 years old, alive, rosy-cheeked, with a bunch of willow twigs clenched in her fist. She'd gathered them while she waited for medicine, just as he'd taught her. For 10 days after the battle, the world was silent. Then it began to speak. First, Haldor arrived. He said that Lord Hawthorne was furious, but his wife calmed him down. Lady Margaret, the very one Finn had treated for kidney stones. She told her husband that the boy who had saved her life was no enemy, that the 23 wounded soldiers had returned alive and healed, that not a single one had been killed, not a single one. She said that if the Lord went after that boy again, he would go alone, without her. Hawthorne remained silent for 3 days. Then he accepted the terms. A single tax for all the villages. No executions, no burnings, peace. When Finn heard this, he was sitting in a clean house, stitching up a cut on Roddy's arm. It was a minor cut. The knife had slipped while he was butchering a hare, but Finn stitched it up just as carefully as he would have stitched a wound after a fight, because it was Roddy's hand, not just any hand. 3 days after the news of the tax, Baron Stylewater arrived, on horseback, with 2 servants and his wife. Finn remembered his name from the stories circulating around the district, but had never met him in person. Lord Edric Stillwater, Hawthorne's neighbor, a minor baron, but with lands and people. His wife was 8 months along, a difficult pregnancy, placenta previa. Their personal healer had refused. He'd said the fetus was dead. Save the mother. Stillwater had brought his wife to a peasant boy because he'd heard. Everyone had heard. And because he loved his wife more than he feared disgrace. Finn examined the woman, Lady Eleanor. Young, frightened. Her belly was enormous. Her skin was pale. Her pulse was rapid. She was bleeding. Placenta previa. The baby was alive. Finn heard the heartbeat when he pressed his ear to her belly. Fast, rhythmic, alive. But a natural birth meant death. For the mother, certainly. The placenta was blocking the birth canal. Bleeding during childbirth would be fatal. The only chance, a cesarean section, in a peasant's kitchen, with no anesthesia except for poppy tincture and alcohol, no sterile operating room, no antibiotics, with instruments that Ben had forged according to his blueprints and which he himself had sharpened and boiled. Finn looked at Stillwater. He told the truth. He said he saw the problem, that the baby was alive, that he could try, but that this was surgery, real surgery. He would be cutting. And if something went wrong, the mother and the baby could die. Stillwater stood there. He looked at his wife, at her belly, where a tiny heart was beating. Then he looked at Finn. He said that if she died, they should hang him too. Finn said no one would be hanged, but he needed certain conditions. A clean room, light, lots of light, assistance, time. Stillwater said he'd provide everything. They spent the whole day preparing. Finn turned the main room of the clean house into an operating room. The table was washed 3 times with boiling water. The cloths were boiled. The instruments were heated over a fire and wiped down with vinegar. 12 candles, a lot for a peasant's hut. But Stillwater had brought his own, thick ones, wax ones. They burn brightly and evenly. Sadie is the assistant. Her hands, her nerves. Finn trusted her as much as he trusted himself. Evelyn monitors the patient's condition, pulse, breathing, consciousness, poppy decoction, a double dose, not anesthesia, but it will dull the pain and cloud her consciousness. Iris stood against the wall, white as a sheet. She knew what a cesarean section was, in theory. In the order's treatises, it was described as a procedure performed on the dead to save the child. Never on the living, never with the expectation that the mother would survive. Finn told Iris he needed her hands. She nodded. She stood next to Sadie. Lady Eleanor lay on the table. Her eyes were clouded by the poppy decoction. Finn placed his hand on her forehead. He said everything would be all right. He lied. He didn't know. He hoped. But he didn't know. He took the knife, thin, razor sharp. Ben had sharpened it for 3 hours. Finn exhaled. The first incision, horizontal, below the navel, skin, subcutaneous tissue, muscles, layer by layer, blood, lots of blood. Sadie was mopping it up, quickly, neatly. Evelyn counted the pulse aloud. Steady, steady for now. Finn worked. His hands moved on their own. A muscle memory this body didn't possess, but his mind did. 7 years of surgical training, thousands of hours in the operating room, a different world, different instruments, but the same hands, the same knowledge. He reached the uterus. He made an incision, carefully. The poppy decoction didn't provide complete pain relief. Lady Eleanor was moaning. Evelyn held her hand. She spoke softly, calmly, like a mother to a child. Finn delivered the baby, a girl, tiny, bluish, not breathing. He turned her over, patted her on the back, once, twice. On the 3rd try, the girl cried out. A thin, piercing cry, the most beautiful sound Finn had ever heard in his 2 lifetimes. Sadie cut the umbilical cord with a clean knife, just as she'd been taught. Iris took the baby and wrapped her in a boiled cloth. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were wet. For the first time in all the years Finn had known her, the ice in Iris's eyes melted completely. Finn returned to the mother, bleeding, heavy. The placenta was coming out in pieces. He worked, stitching, the uterus, the muscles, the skin. Fine, even stitches, horsehair, honey on every layer, antiseptic, the only one available. Evelyn was checking her pulse. It was getting weaker. Finn worked faster. 3 hours, 4, 5, 6. The candles were melting. Sadie kept replacing them without leaving the table. 7 hours. The last stitch. Finn tied a knot, cut the thread, applied a bandage, a clean one, soaked in honey. He stepped back from the table. His legs wouldn't hold him. He sat down on the floor, right on the floor. Evelyn checked Lady Eleanor's pulse. She looked at Finn. She nodded. The pulse was steady, weak, but steady. She was alive. Finn sat on the floor and stared at his hands, covered in blood, trembling. The hands of a 15-year-old boy who had just performed a surgery that was considered impossible in this world. The door opened. Stillwater walked in. He saw his wife on the table, alive, breathing. He saw the bundle in Iris's arms. He heard the soft meow of the newborn. His face. Finn had seen faces like that in his past life. In the maternity ward, when a father is handed a child he was afraid of losing. A mixture of horror and happiness so powerful that a person forgets who he is. Stillwater dropped to one knee, before Finn, a knight by birth, a baron, before a peasant boy on the blood-stained floor. He said he was indebted to him for life, not to him, to Finn. Finn told him to stand up. He said he didn't need debtors, he needed allies. Stillwater stood up. He looked at his daughter in Iris's arms, then at Finn. He said that he'd get it. The rumor of a C-section in a peasant's kitchen had spread throughout the north within a week. From villages, from estates, from towns. A boy who saved a mother and her child by cutting open her belly with a knife. It was impossible. It was a miracle, or heresy, depending on who you asked. But a fact was a fact. Lady Eleanor was recovering, slowly, under Evelyn's care. The girl was growing, healthy, lively. Stillwater came every week. He brought food, fabrics, iron for Ben, not as charity, as payment, for the fact that his wife was alive, for the fact that his daughter was breathing. A month after the operation, a messenger arrived in the Valley of the Ivy, but not from the Lord, from the capital, from Archmage Wayne. The letter was addressed to Iris. She read it in front of Finn. Wayne demanded her return, immediately, with a full report, and with the boy, if possible, for questioning by the order. Iris folded the letter. She looked at Finn. She said she wouldn't go. Finn asked if she understood what that meant. Refusal to obey the Archmage. Expulsion from the order. the loss of everything she had built over the past 10 years. Iris said she understood. She said that in 2 months in the Valley of Ivy, she had learned more than in 10 years in the Order. That for the first time she felt that her mind was not a threat, but a tool. That here she was being taught, not merely tolerated. And that she had no intention of turning in the man who had shown her that medicine is not a privilege, but a right. Finn nodded. He couldn't find the words. He didn't need to. Autumn of the 3rd year. Leaves fell from the trees slowly and quietly. Finn stood on a hill behind the village and looked out at the Valley of the Willows. 2 years and 9 months had passed since that night when he'd woken up in a stranger's body next to his gasping sister. Below, chimneys smoldered, 40 households. But now, 10 more had been added to them. New families, from villages that had been burned and reduced to poverty. People who had come to him because children didn't die here. A clean house stood in the center. Not just one, 3. The main one for treatment, the second for childbirth, the third for learning. A school, a real one, with a roof and walls and benches that Walt, Tom's father, a carpenter, had put together. The very same Tom whose festering leg Finn had stitched up during his first month there. Tom now walked steadily and helped his father. Finn came down from the hill. He walked through the village. People greeted him. They didn't bow. They said hello, as with an equal, as with a neighbor. He wasn't a lord. He wasn't a prophet. He was a boy who healed and taught. That was enough. A lesson was in progress at the school. Lorelei stood before 20 students and read aloud from a manuscript, a section on childhood illnesses. The students took notes, some on parchment, some on birch bark, some on planed wooden slats. Lorelei had taught them over the course of a year, literacy, arithmetic, the basics of anatomy, the basics of hygiene, and the basics of wound surgery. It was the first school in Erwin where they taught neither prayers nor the sword. They taught them to think, to heal, and to count. Finn walked in. Lorelei nodded to him and continued. He sat down in the corner. He listened. He looked at the students' faces. They were focused, hungry for knowledge. Peasant children who, 2 years ago, didn't know the alphabet. Now they knew how the human body works, how blood flows, why a stomach hurts, how to stop bleeding, how to deliver a baby. Trivialities for the world from which Dan came. A revolution for the world where Finn lives. After class, Lorelei approached him. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple knot. Her face was tanned. Her hands were stained with ink. She hadn't worn noble women's dresses in a long time. A simple shirt, a skirt, barefoot on the warm earth. She said they needed to talk. A letter had arrived from Lord Hawthorne. Finn took the letter. He read it. Hawthorne was inviting him to the estate for a conversation, not as a peasant to a lord, but as an equal to an equal. That's how it was written. Finn read it twice, as one equal to another, a 6th-generation lord to a peasant boy. Lorelei said it was either a trap or a turning point, one or the other. Finn said he would go. Haldor accompanied him, and Lorelei, and Iris. Finn wanted to take Sadie, but she stayed behind in the clean house. A woman in labor. Sadie never left women in labor. Never. The Hawthorne estate looked different than it had on their first visit. Quieter, cleaner. The servants didn't stare. They bowed. To Finn, a peasant boy. He noticed it and said nothing. Lord Hawthorne was waiting in the hall, alone, without guards, without his captain. The table was set for 2. Wine, bread, meat. Hawthorne stood when Finn entered, a gesture a lord makes for an equal, not for a subject. They sat down. Hawthorne poured the wine. Finn didn't drink. He'd never drunk in this body, but he took the goblet out of politeness. Hawthorne spoke at length, an hour, maybe longer, about the war in the South that the king is losing, about the taxes that are ruining the North, about the famine that comes every winter, about the diseases that are taking the peasants by the thousands, about the church that burns those who trying to heal, about the order of healers which treats only the rich, about a world that is rotting away. Finn listened. Then Hawthorne said what he had come to say. He said he had lost. Not the battle in the valley, That too, but not only that. He had lost something greater. All his life he had believed that order was maintained by blood and the sword, that a lord ruled because his ancestors had ruled, that a peasant plowed because his ancestors had plowed, and that this was right. And then a boy came along, and in 2 years he did what no lord could do. He saved the village from typhus. He fed the people. He taught the women how to give birth without dying. He stitched up a wound on one of his own soldiers on the battlefield. He saved his neighbor's wife by cutting open her abdomen. And all this without a coat of arms, without a title, without a right, simply because he knew how. Hawthorne fell silent. He drank his wine. Then he said that his wife was alive thanks to Finn, that his villages weren't rebelling because Finn had lowered the taxes, that his soldiers were alive because Finn had ordered them to shoot at the legs, and that he no longer understood the world in which he lived. Finn remained silent. He waited. Hawthorne said he was making an offer, not an alliance, not submission, a deal. Finn would receive the estate, officially, as a tenant for 99 years, with the right to build and teach, with the right to practice medicine openly, under the protection of the Hawthorne name. In return, Finn would treat people on all of Hawthorne's lands, teach, train students, not in secret, openly. Finn looked at him, at this stern, gaunt man who had hanged poachers from trees, who had sent an army against his own villages, and who was now sitting in front of a 15-year-old peasant boy and offering him a future. Finn said he needed more, not for himself, for the cause. He needed a school, a real one, not a hut with benches, a building, with rooms for students, with a lecture hall, with a workshop for tools, a place where people from all over the north could come, to learn to heal, to learn to shoot, to learn to read and count. And this school wouldn't belong to any lord, or the church, or the order. It would belong to knowledge. Hawthorne was silent. He drank some wine. Then he said that Finn was asking for a lot. Finn said that Lady Margaret was alive, and that her life was worth a single building. Hawthorne smiled. For the first time during the entire conversation, he said that the boy was haggling like a merchant. Finn said he was haggling like a doctor, for lives that could be saved. Hawthorne nodded. He said he agreed. They stood up. Hawthorne held out his hand. Finn shook it. The hand of a lord, the hand of a peasant, equal in strength. As Finn was leaving the hall, Hawthorne called out to him from behind. He said that when his soldier was lying on the road with an arrow in his leg and Finn was stitching up his thigh, he had stood 20 paces away and watched, and he realized that he hadn't lost the battle. He had lost an era. Finn turned around. He nodded. He walked out. Late fall, a cold wind from the north, leaves underfoot. They rode back to the village along the road through the forest, Halder in front. Lorelei was beside Finn. Iris was a little behind. Lorelei asked quietly what he was thinking about. Finn was thinking about many things. About the school that needed to be built. About the manuscript that needed to be copied 50 times. About the archers who needed to be trained. About the students who needed to be taught. About Wayne, who wouldn't stop. About Koss, who would return. About the king, who would hear about it sooner or later. But right now, right at this moment, he was thinking about something else, about how 2 years ago he had woken up in the darkness that smelled of smoke and urine, in the body of a starving boy with a black eye, next to his dying sister, with 3 arrows and a handful of other people's memories. And now he has a school, a manuscript in 7 copies, 30 students, 20 archers, 8 longbows, clean houses in 7 villages, a network that saves lives every day, 6 people close to him whom he trusts, and a sister who gathers willow branches for medicine and hands out pebbles to ease the pain. Lorelei was waiting for an answer. Finn said he was thinking about how everything is beginning. She asked what exactly. Finn said he didn't know, but that something was beginning. They rode out of the forest. The valley of the willows lay below, smoke rising from the chimneys, children in the streets, laughter. Sadie was standing by a clean house, holding a newborn in her arms. She saw them. She raised her hand. Her mother was alive. The baby was alive. Another one. Macy ran out to meet them, 9 years old, alive, rosy-cheeked. In one hand, a bouquet of willow twigs, in the other, a pebble. Finn dismounted. He dropped to one knee. He took the pebble. He put it in his pocket next to the first one she'd given him that spring. 2 pebbles for the pain. Macy hugged him, tightly, the way people hug when they know they might never have met. Finn hugged her back. He closed his eyes. For a second, he wasn't there. He was on the bridge in Boston, behind the wheel, falling asleep. And one last thought. I didn't even take my sister to the hospital on her birthday. And then darkness. And then this world. And this girl, who called him here, without even knowing it, because she wanted someone to help her brother. And someone heard her. And here he is, with a pebble of pain in his pocket, with hands that know how to heal and shoot, in a world that's rotting away, and that he's going to fix, not with a sword, not with prayer, with medicine and stitches, with knowledge and patience, one saved child at a time. He opened his eyes, let go of Macy, stood up, looked out at the valley of the willows, at his world, at the beginning. He said quietly, "Tomorrow we'll start building a school." He turned and walked toward the clean house. Sadie handed him the newborn. He took the baby, small, warm, alive. He examined the baby instinctively, healthy, strong. This one will live to see spring, and the next winter, and the one after that. Because the world in Willow Valley is already different, and this world will grow, slowly, steadily, like a willow, which bends, but does not break, and whose bark heals. Finn returned the child to Sadie. He washed his hands in a basin of boiling water, dried them off. He entered the clean house. His patients were waiting for him.